tonight we explore one of the most essential teachings in all of Buddhism, the teaching of impermanence. This truth sits at the very heart of what the Buddha discovered and what Zen practice reveals to us again and again. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. Much of our suffering comes from resisting change, from trying to hold on to what is passing, from demanding that life stay the same. When we understand impermanence deeply, we can finally stop fighting the river's flow. We can appreciate what is here while it is here. We can love without grasping. The teaching of impermanence invites us not just to think about change, but to recognize it happening in every moment, to feel it in our own lives, and ultimately to make peace with it. So settle in comfortably now. Notice your breathing, which continues on its own without any effort from you. Just listen and allow this ancient wisdom to settle into you like nourishing rain soaking into earth. There is something we expect from life that life cannot give us. We expect things to stay the same. We expect that what exists now will continue to exist tomorrow, next week, next year. We expect the people we know to remain fundamentally unchanged. We expect our own bodies and capabilities to last. We expect that if something is true today, it will be true forever. This expectation is so deep in us that we rarely notice it. We arrange our lives as if permanence were real. We make plans that assume the future will be like the present. We hold mental images of people and places as if they were frozen in time. We believe that who we are now is who we have always been and who we will always be. But reality does not cooperate with this expectation. Everything is constantly changing, constantly becoming something other than what it was. The river flows. The seasons turn. Children grow. Bodies age. Relationships transform. Even rocks, which seem so solid and unchanging, are slowly wearing away, reshaping themselves grain by grain. The Buddha taught that this constant change, this impermanence, is one of the three marks of existence. It is not an occasional feature of life that affects some things sometimes. It is the fundamental nature of all phenomena, all experience, all existence. Nothing escapes it. Nothing stands outside it. Everything that arises will pass away. Everything that comes together will eventually come apart. Everything that is born will die. This teaching can sound harsh or depressing at first. We do not want to hear that everything we love will change and eventually be lost. We do not want to accept that nothing we build will last forever. We do not want to face the truth that our own lives are temporary, that everyone we know will one day be gone, that every experience we treasure will end. But the teaching of impermanence is not meant to make us sad or afraid. It is meant to wake us up, to help us see reality as it actually is, rather than as we wish it to be. To free us from the suffering that comes from constantly fighting against the nature of existence itself. When we truly understand impermanence, when we stop resisting it and learn to flow with it, something profound shifts in how we experience life. Let us explore a story that reveals this truth. There once lived a potter named Tomoe, who had left her village as a young woman to study her craft in the capital city. For 40 years, she lived far from home, learning from master potters, developing her skills, eventually becoming known for her delicate tea bowls and elegant vases. Her work was refined and beautiful, sought after by tea masters and collectors throughout the region. But as Tomoe grew older, she began to think more often about her childhood. She remembered her village, nestled in the mountains, the simple house where she had grown up, and especially the river that ran through the valley. That river had been her constant companion as a child. She had played beside it every day, wading in its shallows during summer, watching it rush with snowmelt in spring, listening to its voice through all the seasons. In her memory, the river was perfect and unchanging. When she felt lonely in the capital city, she would close her eyes and imagine herself back beside that river, and the memory brought her comfort. The river of her childhood seemed like the one permanent, reliable thing in a life that had taken so many unexpected turns. When Tomoe turned 60, she decided to return to her village for a visit. The journey took several days, and with each mile, her anticipation grew. She would see her river again. She would stand beside those familiar waters and feel like herself again, like the girl she had been before life carried her away. She arrived on a clear morning in early autumn. The village was much smaller than she remembered, and many of the houses were different, but she found her way to the path that led down to the river. Her heart was beating fast with excitement as she walked through the trees. Soon she would see it. Soon she would be home. But when Tomoe came through the last line of trees and stood on the riverbank, she felt a shock of confusion and disappointment. This was not her river. The river of her memory had been wide and strong, its waters clear and bright. This river was narrower, its flow more sluggish. The large, smooth rock where she used to sit was gone, replaced by a scatter of smaller stones. The old willow tree that had hung over the water had fallen, its rotting trunk lying half in the current. Tomoe walked up and down the bank, looking for something familiar, something that matched her memory. But everything seemed wrong. Even the sound of the water was different. Where was the river she remembered? Where was the place that had stayed so clear and perfect in her mind all these years? She sat down on an unfamiliar rock and felt tears come to her eyes. She had traveled so far to return to something that no longer existed. The river had betrayed her. It had not waited for her. It had not remained the same. An old man was fishing a short distance downstream. He watched Tomoe for a while, then walked over and sat nearby. He did not say anything at first, just sat with a comfortable silence that suggested he was used to his own company. Finally, Tomoe spoke. "I grew up in this village," she said. "I used to come to this river every day as a child, but it has changed so much. I barely recognize it." The old man nodded slowly. "I have lived here my whole life," he said. 80 years beside this river. "Then you must remember how it used to be," Tomoe said hopefully. "How it was 40 years ago when I left." The old man smiled slightly. "I remember many rivers. This river has been different every year, different every season, different every day, really, if you pay attention." Tomoe felt frustrated by this response. But surely the basic character of the river has remained the same? The essential nature of it? What is the essential nature of a river? The old man asked gently. Is it the water? But the water is always new water, flowing from the mountains, flowing to the sea. Never the same water twice. Is it the banks? But the banks are always changing, carved by floods, built up by sediment, shaped by the roots of growing trees. Is it the rocks in the riverbed? But the rocks move and shift and break apart, and new rocks tumble down from the cliffs above. He looked at the water flowing past them. I have lived beside this river for 80 years, and I have never seen the same river twice. It is always becoming something new. This morning's river is already gone. This afternoon's river has not yet arrived. There is only this moment's river, and it is already passing away. Tomoe sat quietly with these words. In her mind, she had held an image of the river that never changed. She had thought of it as a permanent place she could return to, a fixed point in a life full of movement and transformation. But the old man was showing her that her image was an illusion. The river she remembered had never truly existed except as a moment that arose and passed away 4 decades ago. I have been foolish, she said quietly. I have been carrying a picture in my mind and calling it the river. I have been loving my memory instead of reality. That is what we all do, the old man said kindly. We want things to stay the same. We want to be able to return to places and find them unchanged. We want our memories to match what is here now. But reality has no obligation to match our pictures. Reality is too busy changing to stand still for our memories. Tomoe looked at the river with new eyes. This river, flowing before her now, was real. It was alive. It was doing what rivers do, which is to flow and change and reshape themselves endlessly. The river of her childhood was gone because that is the nature of rivers. They do not wait. They do not preserve themselves for our return. They continue their endless transformation, moment by moment, year by year. She noticed things about this present river that she had missed while comparing it to her memory. The way the light played on the surface, the sound of water moving around a partially submerged branch, a small bird standing on a rock, dipping its head to drink. These things were here now, real and immediate, while she had been lost in grief for a past that existed only in her thoughts. Thank you, Tomoe said to the old man. You have shown me something important. The old man stood up, preparing to return to his fishing. The river teaches us every day if we watch it. Nothing stays. Everything flows. This is not a sad truth. It is simply the truth. After he left, Tomoe stayed by the river for a long time. She watched the water moving past, never the same water twice. She noticed how clouds were reflected on the surface, appearing and disappearing as they moved across the sky. She saw how a leaf fell from a tree and was carried downstream, visible for a few moments before passing out of sight around a bend. As she watched, something released in her chest. She had been holding so tightly to her image of how things should be, how they should have remained. But the river was teaching her what the old man had said. Nothing stays. Everything flows. This is not betrayal. This is nature. When Tomoe finally walked back to the village that evening, she was not the same person who had walked down to the river that morning. She had come expecting to find permanence and had discovered change. She had come seeking the past and had found only the present. And in discovering this, she had learned something that would change how she saw everything from that day forward. Tomoe's story shows us something essential about impermanence. She carried an image in her mind of the river as it had been 40 years earlier. She thought of this image as the real river, the true river. But the image was only a thought, a memory, a picture frozen in time. The actual river had continued changing every moment of those 40 years. We do this constantly in our lives. We hold mental pictures of how things were or how things should be, and we compare reality to these pictures. When reality does not match our image, we feel disappointed, betrayed, or sad. We think something has gone wrong. But nothing has gone wrong. Reality has simply continued being what it always is, which is impermanent. The Buddha used the image of a river in his teachings. He said you cannot step in the same river twice because it is not the same river and you are not the same person. The water that touched your foot a moment ago has flowed downstream. New water has taken its place, and you yourself have changed in that moment. Different cells in your body, different thoughts in your mind, everything in constant motion. This is not just a philosophical idea or a poetic metaphor. It is a description of what actually happens in every moment. The world you are experiencing right now is not the same world that existed a moment ago. Your body is not the same body. Your thoughts are not the same thoughts. Everything is in flux, constantly arising and passing away. When we truly see this, when we recognize it in our direct experience rather than just thinking about it, something shifts. We stop expecting permanence. We stop demanding that things remain the same. We stop fighting against the fundamental nature of reality itself. And in this acceptance, we find a kind of freedom and peace that was not available when we were constantly resisting change. Let us explore another story that reveals a different aspect of this teaching. In a village known for its gardens, there lived a gardener named Hayato who had devoted his life to cultivating beauty. He tended the grounds of a wealthy family's estate, and his work was admired throughout the region. But the crown jewel of his garden was an ancient cherry tree that stood near the main house. This tree was very old, perhaps 200 years. Its trunk was thick and gnarled. Its branches spread wide, creating a canopy of shade, and every spring it produced the most magnificent blossoms. When the tree bloomed, people would come from neighboring villages just to stand beneath it and marvel. The flowers were perfectly pink, delicate as paper, abundant beyond counting. They would last for perhaps 2 weeks and then fall like snow, carpeting the ground in soft petals. Hayato had tended this tree for 30 years. He knew every branch, every curve of its bark. He pruned it carefully each year, fed its roots, protected it from disease and pests. The tree was not just a plant to him. It was like a friend, a companion, a living presence that had been part of his daily life for 3 decades. Every spring, Hayato would wait with anticipation for the tree to bloom. He knew the signs. The tiny buds would swell. The earliest flowers would begin to open. And then, seemingly overnight, the entire tree would burst into full glory. It was the highlight of his year, the moment when all his patient work seemed justified and rewarded. But one spring, as the season for blooming arrived, something was wrong. The buds appeared as usual, but they were fewer than normal. They swelled slowly, reluctantly, and when they opened, the blossoms were sparse and pale. Instead of covering the branches in clouds of pink, they appeared scattered and weak. Hayato was deeply troubled. He examined the tree carefully, looking for signs of disease or damage. He tested the soil. He consulted with other gardeners, but he could find no clear explanation for the poor blooming. The tree simply was not blooming well. The next spring was worse. The buds were even fewer. Many branches produced no flowers at all. The blossoms that did appear were small and faded quickly. Hayato's heart ached as he looked at the tree. It seemed diminished, tired, as if its life force was slowly draining away. In the third spring, the tree did not bloom at all. Not a single flower appeared. The branches remained bare, while other cherry trees throughout the village burst into their annual glory. Hayato felt this as a personal failure and a profound loss. He had tended this tree with such care. He had thought his devotion could keep it healthy and beautiful forever. But the tree was failing anyway, and he did not know how to save it. He sat beneath the bare branches one morning, feeling a grief that surprised him with its intensity. "It is only a tree," he told himself. But it did not feel like only a tree. It felt like watching something beloved fade away, helpless to prevent it. A young man approached. His name was Jun, and he had recently arrived in the village to study gardening with Hayato. He was perhaps 20 years old, eager and observant. "Master Hayato," Yun said carefully. "May I sit with you?" Hayato nodded without speaking. Jun sat quietly for a while, looking up at the bare branches against the sky. Finally, he spoke. "The tree is very beautiful." Hayato felt a flash of irritation. "It is not beautiful. It is dying. Look at it. No blossoms. It has failed." "I see a tree that has lived for 200 years, Jun said gently. "I see branches that have held countless blossoms in their time. I see bark that shows the marks of 2 centuries of weather and growth. I see a shape that has been sculpted by time and wind into something unique. When I look at this tree, I see something beautiful." "You are young," Hayato said, his voice harder than he intended. "You did not see this tree in full bloom. You do not know what has been lost." "That is true," Jun agreed. "I only know what is here now. And what is here now is still beautiful, even without flowers." Hayato wanted to argue, but he found he could not. He looked at the tree again, trying to see it as Jun saw it. Without the expectation of blossoms. Without the comparison to past springs. Just the tree as it was now, in this moment. The trunk was indeed impressive, weathered and strong. The pattern of the bark told a story of endurance. The way the branches reached out created a kind of sculptural beauty even without leaves or flowers. The tree had presence and dignity, even in its declining years. "All things change," Jun said quietly. "This tree bloomed magnificently for many years. Now it is in a different stage of its life. Perhaps it will bloom again, or perhaps it will not. But either way, it is still itself. Still worthy of respect. Still teaching us something." "What is it teaching?" Hayato asked. "That nothing stays the same," Jun replied. "That even the most beautiful things must age and fade. That this is not failure. This is simply the way of all living things. The tree is showing us how to age with dignity, how to be beautiful in every season, not just in spring." Hayato sat with these words. He had been so focused on the tree's past glory that he had not really seen the tree as it was now. He had been grieving what was lost instead of appreciating what remained. He had been demanding that the tree stay the same forever, which was impossible. No living thing can stay the same. everything must change. Over the following months, Hayato's relationship with the tree transformed. He still cared for it, but he released his attachment to it blooming. He appreciated its presence without needing it to perform or produce. He noticed its beauty in different ways. The way birds nested in its branches, the shade it still provided on hot summer days, the way snow caught in its bare limbs in winter, creating delicate patterns. 3 years later, the old cherry tree died. Its trunk split in a storm, and it became clear that its life had ended. Hayato felt sadness at its passing, but not the desperate grief he had felt when it stopped blooming. He understood now that the tree's life, like all lives, had a natural arc. It had been born, grown, flourished, declined, and died. This was not tragedy. This was completeness. The wealthy family asked Hayato if he wanted to remove the dead tree and plant a new one. But Hayato suggested they leave the trunk standing for a while. "Let it teach us," he said. "Let it show us the full cycle. How life turns to decay. How decay feeds new life. How nothing is wasted in nature's processes." Jun, who was now a skilled gardener himself, understood what his teacher was saying. "Everything arises and passes away," he said. "This tree taught us in its blooming. Now it teaches us in its dying." "Yes," Hayato agreed. "And both teachings are equally valuable." These two stories reveal the same truth from different angles. Tomoe learned that the places we remember do not stay the same. Hayato learned that the things we love will age and change and eventually die. Both of them had to release their expectations of permanence. Both of them had to accept that reality will not stand still to match our wishes. This is perhaps the hardest teaching to truly accept. We know intellectually that things change. We know that nothing lasts forever. But in our hearts, we keep hoping that what we love will somehow be the exception. We hope that this relationship will never change, that this health will last, that this happiness will endure, that the people we cherish will always be here. But the teaching of impermanence does not make exceptions. Everything that arises will pass away. Everything that comes together will come apart. Everything that is born will die. This includes everything we hold dear. This includes everything we think makes us who we are. This includes our own lives. The Buddha taught that understanding impermanence deeply is essential to awakening. When we truly see that nothing lasts, that everything is constantly changing, that we cannot hold on to anything permanently, we begin to release our tight grip on life. We stop trying to make things stay the same. We stop fighting against the river's flow. We stop demanding that reality be permanent when its very nature is to change. And in this release, we discover something unexpected. When we stop fighting impermanence, we can finally be present for life as it actually is. We can appreciate the cherry blossoms while they bloom, knowing they will fall. We can love people fully, knowing they will change and eventually leave. We can experience joy deeply, knowing it will pass. The impermanence does not diminish these experiences. It makes them more precious, more vivid, more real. As you rest with this teaching, you might notice the constant change happening in your own experience right now. Your breath is always different. Your thoughts keep moving. Sensations arise and fade in your body. Sounds come and go. the light changes subtly. Everything in your field of awareness is impermanent, constantly transforming, never holding still. This is not a problem to solve. This is the nature of being alive. And when we stop resisting it, when we flow with it rather than against it, we discover a kind of peace that was never available through our attempts to make things permanent. The river keeps flowing. The seasons keep turning. The cherry tree blooms and fades and dies and returns to the earth. And in all of this constant change, there is a kind of rightness, a natural order that we can align ourselves with or resist. Resistance brings suffering. Acceptance brings peace. This is the teaching of impermanence, not as an abstract concept, but as a living truth that we can see and feel and know in every moment of our lives. Take a moment to rest. Feel the support beneath you. Notice any sounds around you, arising and fading. Everything you hear will pass away. Every sensation you feel is already changing. This is not something to fear. This is simply how things are. We carry images of people in our minds. Our parents as they were when we were children. Our friends as they were in school. Our partners as they were when we first met them. We hold these images carefully, as if they were photographs we can return to whenever we want to remember who someone truly is. But the person in our image is not the person standing before us. The parent we remember from childhood has lived decades more, experienced joys and losses we may never know about, been shaped by time and circumstance into someone subtly or dramatically different. The friend from school has encountered their own struggles, made their own discoveries, traveled their own path to become someone we might not recognize if we met them fresh today. The partner we fell in love with has continued growing, changing, becoming in ways both small and profound. This is one of the most difficult aspects of impermanence to accept. We can understand intellectually that rivers change and cherry trees age, but we struggle deeply with the truth that people change. We want the people we love to remain the same. We want to know them completely and have that knowledge stay accurate forever. We want relationships to feel stable, predictable, secure. But people are not stable. They are not fixed objects we can finally understand and then check off as known. People are like clouds, constantly forming and reforming, never the same from one moment to the next. The person you spoke with this morning is not quite the same person you speak with this evening. Something has shifted, however slightly. Some experience has touched them. Some thought has moved through them. Some change has occurred. This truth can feel threatening at first. If people are always changing, how can we trust them? How can we build lasting relationships? How can we ever truly know anyone? But there is another way to see it. When we recognize that people are always becoming someone new, we can meet them freshly instead of through our outdated images of who they used to be. We can remain curious instead of assuming we already understand. We can allow relationships to be alive rather than frozen. Let us explore a story that reveals this truth. There once lived a merchant named Issei who traded in silk and fine fabrics. His work required him to travel frequently between villages and towns, buying from weavers and selling to shops and wealthy families. It was a good life, prosperous and full of variety, though sometimes lonely. One summer, Issei's business brought him to a town he had not visited in 20 years. He had lived in this town as a young man, studying commerce and learning his trade. Those had been formative years, full of energy and friendship and the excitement of discovering who he would become. As Issei walked through the familiar streets, now somewhat changed but still recognizable, he thought about his closest friend from those years. Now had been like a brother to him. They had studied together, dreamed together, supported each other through difficulties, and celebrated each other's successes. When Issei had left town to establish his business elsewhere, they had promised to stay in touch. But as often happens, letters became less frequent over time, then stopped altogether. 20 years had passed without contact. Issei asked around and learned that Nao still lived in the town. He was no longer involved in commerce but had become a teacher at a small school for children. Issei felt a surge of excitement would surprise his old friend. They would reminisce about old times. They would laugh about their youthful adventures and pick up their friendship exactly where it had left off. He found the school easily and waited outside as the day's lessons ended. Children poured out of the building, running and calling to each other. Then he saw Nao emerge, walking slowly, carrying books and papers. Issei's first thought was surprise at how much his friend had aged. Of course he had aged, they both had, but somehow Issei had not expected it. The energetic young man he remembered had become a middle-aged man with graying hair and a slightly stooped posture. "Now," Issei called out, walking forward with a broad smile. "Do you remember me?" Nao looked up, his expression uncertain at first, then gradually brightening with recognition. "Issei? Can it really be you?" They embraced, both laughing with the surprise and pleasure of the unexpected reunion. "I cannot believe it," Nao said. "After all these years, what brings you to town?" "Business," Issei said. "I am trading silk. But I had to find you when I learned you still lived here. I have thought of you so many times over the years." They agreed to meet that evening at a tea house they had frequented as young men. Issei spent the afternoon filled with anticipation. He mentally reviewed all the stories he wanted to share, all the memories he wanted to revisit. This would be like stepping back in time, he thought. For one evening, he could be young again with his closest friend. But when they sat together that evening, Issei felt a growing confusion and disappointment. Nao was there physically, but the person Issei had been looking forward to seeing seemed absent. His friend spoke quietly, almost hesitantly. He seemed uninterested in reminiscing about their shared past. When Issei brought up old adventures, Nao would acknowledge them briefly but did not elaborate or add his own memories. The laughter and energy Issei remembered were nowhere to be found. Issei tried harder to recreate the old feeling. He told stories about their youthful exploits, trying to draw Nao into the shared memory. He reminded his friend of jokes they had shared, dreams they had discussed, plans they had made. But Nao responded with polite smiles that did not reach his eyes. Finally, Issei's frustration broke through his good manners. "What has happened to you?" he asked. "You seem so different, so quiet and withdrawn. Where is the friend I remember?" Nao was silent for a long moment, looking down at his teacup. When he spoke, his voice was very soft. "That friend is gone, Issei. He was someone I was 20 years ago. I am not that person anymore." "But people do not change that much," Issei protested. "Not fundamentally. You are still you." Nao looked up, and Issei saw something in his eyes that made him go quiet. There was a depth of sadness there that had not been present in his youthful friend. "Many things have happened in 20 years, Nao said. I married. My wife was everything to me. We had a daughter. For 10 years, I was happier than I had ever been. Then my daughter became ill. We tried everything to help her, spent all our money, consulted every doctor. But she died. She was only 8 years old." Issei felt his chest tighten. "Now, I am so sorry. I did not know." "How could you know?" Nao said without bitterness. "We had not spoken in years. After my daughter died, my wife could not bear to stay in this town. She left. She needed to start fresh somewhere else, and I understood. I do not blame her. But I stayed. I took a position teaching children, perhaps as a way to still be around the age my daughter would have been. Perhaps as a way to honor her memory by helping other children learn and grow." He paused, turning his cup slowly in his hands. "The person you remember, the energetic young merchant full of ambitions and laughter, that person existed before all of this happened. Grief changed me, Issei. Loss changed me. I am not that person anymore. I cannot be." Issei sat in silence, shame washing over him. He had come here expecting his friend to have waited unchanged, to have preserved himself like an object in storage so that Issei could return and find everything exactly as he had left it. He had not considered that his friend had continued living, experiencing, being shaped by his own journey. "I have been foolish," Issei said quietly. "I came here wanting to find my old friend, wanting to relive old times. But I was not thinking of you as a real person who has had a real life. I was thinking of you as a character in my memories, someone who should have stayed the same for my convenience." Nao's expression softened. "I understand. I have done the same thing. Sometimes I wish I could be that young man again. Sometimes I resent that I cannot offer you the friendship you remember. But I cannot go back. None of us can. We can only be who we have become." They sat together in silence for a while. Then Issei asked, "Will you tell me about your daughter? What was she like?" For the first time that evening, something opened in Nao's face. He began to speak about his daughter, her curiosity, her love of stories, the questions she would ask. As he spoke, Issei began to see his friend not as a disappointing version of someone from the past, but as an actual person with depth and experience and a story that had continued during all those years of separation. They talked late into the evening, not about the past, but about the present, about Nao's students and the satisfaction he found in teaching, about Issei's travels and the lessons he had learned about people and trade. They were not recreating an old friendship. They were discovering whether a new friendship might be possible between who they had each become. When they parted that night, Issei felt something different than he had expected to feel. Not the satisfaction of reclaiming the past, but the bittersweet recognition that the past was truly gone. His friend from 20 years ago no longer existed. But this person, this man shaped by love and loss and survival, was real and present. And perhaps, if Issei could release his attachment to who Nao used to be, he could begin to know who Nao actually was. Issei's story shows us something painful but essential about impermanence. People change. Sometimes gradually, sometimes dramatically. The person we knew years ago, or even yesterday, is not quite the same person today. Life shapes us. Experience molds us. Joy and suffering and all the moments in between continuously transform who we are. This is difficult to accept because we want stability in our relationships. We want to know people completely and have that knowledge remain accurate. We want our loved ones to be predictable, reliable, unchanging. When they change in ways we did not expect or do not like, we feel betrayed. We think they have become someone other than their true self. But there is no fixed true self. There is only the continuous unfolding of a person responding to life. We do this with everyone in our lives. We freeze our parents at a certain age and are surprised when they grow older and frailer. We hold images of our children at particular stages and struggle when they grow beyond those images. We meet our partners with expectations based on who they were last year or last week, and we miss who they are today. The teaching of impermanence invites us to release these frozen images, to see the people in our lives as they actually are, not as we remember them or expect them to be. To remain curious about who they are becoming, instead of insisting they remain who they were. To allow relationships to be alive and changing, rather than dead and fixed. This does not mean relationships cannot have stability or depth. But the stability comes not from people staying the same, but from continuously meeting each other anew. From being willing to discover each other again and again. From recognizing that the person you love today is not quite the same person you loved yesterday and loving them anyway. Or perhaps loving them more deeply because you see them truly rather than through your outdated images. Let us explore another story that reveals how this truth applies to our own changing nature. In a monastery known for its tea ceremonies, there lived an elderly woman named Fumiko, who had been practicing the art of tea for over 50 years. She had studied under great masters in her youth. She had perfected every movement, every gesture, every aspect of the ceremony until her practice was flawless. People would travel great distances to attend her tea ceremonies, which were considered among the finest in the region. Fumiko took deep pride in the precision of her practice. The way she heated water, prepared the bowl, whisked the tea, each movement was exact. There was no wasted motion, no uncertainty, no error. She had worked for decades to achieve this level of mastery, and it had become central to her identity. She was Fumiko the tea master, renowned for her perfect technique. But as Fumiko grew older, something began to change. Her hands, which had been so steady for so many years, began to tremble slightly. At first, the trembling was barely noticeable. She could compensate for it, adjust her movements to maintain the appearance of steadiness. But gradually, it became more pronounced. The tremor she had been able to hide became visible to others. This development filled Fumiko with shame and fear. Her entire identity was built on precision and control. What was a tea master whose hands shook? What value did she have if she could no longer perform the ceremony perfectly? She began to decline invitations to lead ceremonies, making excuses about being busy or unwell. She withdrew from teaching, afraid that students would lose respect for her if they saw her imperfection. A young woman named Chiyo, who had been studying with Fumiko for several years, noticed her teacher's withdrawal. She had learned much from Fumiko and was troubled to see her becoming isolated and sad. One day, she approached her teacher directly. "Master Fumiko," she said respectfully, "I miss attending your tea ceremonies. Will you prepare tea for me today?" Fumiko felt a wave of panic. "I'm not feeling well today," she said. Perhaps another time. But Chio did not leave. She sat down and waited quietly. Her patient presence made it impossible for Fumiko to hide behind excuses. Finally, Fumiko admitted the truth. "My hands shake," she said, holding them out so Chio could see the slight tremor. "I can no longer perform the ceremony properly." A tea master with unsteady hands is not a tea master at all. Chio looked at the trembling hands with neither pity nor judgment. "Will you prepare tea for me anyway?" she asked. Fumiko wanted to refuse, but something in her student's calm request made her agree. She prepared the tea room, gathered the utensils, heated the water. Her heart was beating fast with anxiety. When she began the ceremony, her hands were shaking more than usual, amplified by her nervousness. The ladle trembled as she transferred water. The whisk moved less smoothly than it once had. The tea she prepared was still perfectly good, but the movements were not flawless. She could not hide what was happening. Her imperfection was visible, undeniable. When she served the tea to Chio, Fumiko felt tears of shame in her eyes. "I am sorry," she whispered. "This is not the ceremony you deserve." Chio accepted the tea bowl with both hands and raised it respectfully. She took a sip, then looked at her teacher with an expression of deep appreciation. "This is the most moving tea ceremony I have ever experienced," she said. Fumiko looked at her in confusion. "How can you say that?" My hands shook throughout. The movements were imperfect. "Yes," Chio agreed. "And that made it more beautiful. When your movements were perfect, I admired your technique. But today, I saw something deeper. I saw the effort it took to continue despite the difficulty. I saw your vulnerability. I saw your humanity." The trembling hands did not diminish the ceremony. They revealed something true about all of us. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We all change, Master. We all age. Our bodies become less reliable. This is not failure. This is simply being human. You taught me perfect technique, which is valuable. But today you taught me something more important. You taught me that practice continues even when the body changes. That the spirit of tea ceremony is not in flawless movements, but in sincere presence." Fumiko sat in silence, absorbing these words. She had believed that her value lay in her unchanging perfection. She had built her entire identity around being the master with flawless technique. But that person was gone. Her body had changed. She could no longer perform as she once had. And she had thought this meant she was finished, useless, no longer herself. But Chio was showing her something different. She was still herself, but a different version of herself. A version shaped by age and the body's natural decline. This version could not do everything the younger version could do. But it could offer something the younger version could not offer. Vulnerability. Humanity. The wisdom that comes from accepting change rather than resisting it. "I have been fighting against what is happening," Fumiko said slowly. "I have been trying to remain the person I was. But that person is gone. My body has changed. And I thought that meant I was no longer worthy, no longer valuable." "You are still you," Chio said gently. "Just a different expression of you. The you who had perfect control taught me many things. But this you, the one whose hands tremble, is teaching me something deeper about acceptance and grace. Over the following months, Fumiko slowly returned to teaching and performing ceremonies. She did not try to hide her trembling hands or pretend they were steady. She acknowledged the change openly. Some people were disappointed that her technique was no longer flawless. But many others found her ceremonies more moving than before, more honest, more touching in their visible vulnerability. A year later, another elderly tea practitioner visited Fumiko. This woman's hands also trembled with age, and she confessed that she had stopped practicing because she was ashamed of her imperfection. Fumiko prepared tea for her visitor, her hands visibly shaking throughout the ceremony. When she served the tea, she said, "I spent a year hiding because I thought change meant failure. But I have learned that change is simply change. We are not betraying ourselves by aging. We are continuing ourselves in a new form. The tea I prepare today is different than the tea I prepared 10 years ago. But it is still genuine. It is still sincere. It is still tea." The visiting practitioner looked at Fumiko's trembling hands and then at her own. "You have given me permission to continue," she said quietly. "To be who I am now instead of grieving who I was." "We all need that permission," Fumiko replied. "To let ourselves change. To let others see our changes. To understand that becoming someone different does not mean we have failed at being ourselves." These two stories reveal the same truth about people and change. Issei learned that others change in ways we cannot predict or control. Fumiko learned that we ourselves change in ways that can feel like losing who we are. Both discoveries are challenging. Both require us to release our attachment to fixed identities and unchanging relationships. The person you think of as yourself is not a fixed entity. It is a continuous process. You are not the same person you were as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult. Your body has changed. Your mind has changed. Your understanding has changed. Even your memories have changed, reshaping themselves each time you recall them. The person who began listening to this teaching is not quite the same person who is listening now. This applies to everyone. Your parents are not the same people who raised you. Your children are not the same children they were last week. Your friends have been shaped by experiences you may not know about. Your partner has continued growing in directions you may not have noticed. Everyone is constantly becoming someone new. We resist this truth because it feels destabilizing. If people are always changing, what can we rely on? If even our own identity is impermanent, who are we? These questions can create anxiety, but they can also create freedom. When we accept that people change, including ourselves, we can stop trying to force everyone to stay the same. We can meet people as they actually are today instead of comparing them to who they were yesterday. We can allow ourselves to grow and change without feeling like we are betraying some fixed version of who we should be. We can let relationships evolve naturally instead of trying to freeze them at some ideal point. The teaching is not that people change, therefore we cannot trust them. The teaching is that people change, therefore we must keep meeting them freshly. The love that acknowledges impermanence and continues anyway is deeper than the love that depends on everything staying the same. This is what the teaching of impermanence asks of us in our relationships. Not to stop loving people because they change, but to keep discovering who they are becoming. To release our frozen images and meet the living, changing person. To extend the same grace to others that we hope they will extend to us as we change. Because we are all changing. Every single one of us. We are like clouds, constantly forming and reforming. What appears solid and unchanging from a distance reveals itself to be fluid and dynamic up close. People are not things we can finally understand and then check off as known. They are mysteries that keep unfolding, always offering something new if we remain open to seeing it. This is the wisdom of seeing people as clouds rather than monuments. Clouds are beautiful precisely because they change. We do not expect clouds to stay the same. We appreciate their constant transformation. Perhaps we can learn to see people the same way. Beautiful in their changing, precious in their impermanence, always becoming something new. Rest for a moment. Notice your body exactly as it is right now. It is not the same body you had yesterday or last year or 10 years ago. Every cell has been replaced multiple times. You are literally not the same physical being you were in the past. And this is not a problem. This is simply the nature of being alive. There is a teacher that speaks to us every day, a teacher we often try to ignore. This teacher does not use words. It speaks through sensation, through capacity, through the simple facts of what is possible and what is no longer possible. This teacher is our own body. The body does not lie. It cannot pretend to be younger than it is. It cannot maintain abilities that have faded. It cannot hold onto strength that has diminished. The body shows us impermanence more directly than anything else in our experience. Every day, in ways both subtle and obvious, our bodies are changing. We know this intellectually. We understand that bodies age, that children grow, that injuries heal or leave their marks, that illness comes and sometimes goes. But knowing this and truly accepting it are very different things. We spend enormous energy trying to fight against our body's natural changes. We resist aging. We deny declining capacities. We feel betrayed when our bodies no longer do what they once did easily. But the body is not betraying us. It is simply being honest about the nature of physical existence. All bodies are temporary. All physical forms are in constant flux. The body we inhabit today is not the same body we inhabited a year ago, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. Millions of cells have died and been replaced. Tissues have broken down and rebuilt themselves. The entire physical structure has transformed, again and again, following patterns we did not choose and cannot control. This teaching can be painful. We identify strongly with our bodies. We think of ourselves as our physical form. When the body changes in ways we do not like, we feel like we are losing ourselves. The athlete whose body weakens. The dancer whose joints stiffen. The worker whose strength fades. Each change can feel like a small death, a loss of who we are. Yet the body's changes are not failures. They are simply the body being a body, following its nature. And when we can stop fighting this nature, when we can accept the body's honest teaching about impermanence, we discover a different way of being embodied. Not grasping at what was, not mourning what is passing, but meeting the body as it actually is, in this moment, with whatever capacities it has right now. A story can show us this truth more clearly. In a village at the edge of a vast forest, there lived a man named Goro, who had been an archer since childhood. His father had taught him to use the bow, and he had practiced every day for 40 years. Archery was not just a skill for Goro. It was his art, his meditation, his way of being in the world. When he drew the bow and released the arrow, everything else fell away. There was only the target, the breath, the perfect moment of release. Goro's accuracy was legendary. He could hit targets at distances that amazed other archers. He could shoot in wind, in rain, in dim light. His eyes were sharp, his hands steady, his focus absolute. People would come from neighboring villages to watch him practice and to ask for his teaching. But as Goro reached his middle years, something began to change. At first, it was barely noticeable. A target that should have been clear appeared slightly fuzzy at the edges. He would squint and the fuzziness would resolve, so he dismissed it as temporary, perhaps caused by dust or fatigue. But gradually, the problem persisted and worsened. Objects at a distance became harder to see clearly. The center of the target, which should have been sharp and distinct, became vague. He found himself missing shots he would have made easily just a year before. Not by much at first, but enough to trouble him deeply. Goro visited a healer who examined his eyes and delivered unwelcome news. His vision was fading in the way that often happens as people age. There was no cure, no treatment that would restore what was being lost. The healer was gentle but direct. Goro's eyes would continue to weaken. He needed to accept this truth and adapt to it. This news devastated Goro. His entire identity was built on being an archer. Take away his keen eyesight, and what was left? He was not a master of archery without the ability to see his target clearly. He was nothing, no one, a man whose purpose had been taken from him. For weeks, Goro barely practiced. When he did pick up his bow, he became frustrated and angry. Each missed shot felt like evidence of his diminishing worth. His body was betraying him. His eyes were failing him. The archer he had been for 40 years was dying, and he did not know who he would be without that identity. One day, as Goro sat in bitter silence near the archery range, a traveling monk passed by and asked if he might rest there for a while. Goro nodded without much interest. The monk sat quietly, apparently content to simply be present in the space. After some time, the monk spoke. "I notice you have a fine bow, but you are not practicing. May I ask why?" Goro felt his anger rise. "My eyes are failing. I can no longer see the target clearly. An archer who cannot see is useless." The monk nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And what made you an archer? Was it only your eyes?" "Of course," Goro said. "Without keen vision, how can one aim accurately?" "Perhaps," the monk said. "But I wonder, in all your years of practice, what were you actually practicing? The movement of your eyes? Or something deeper?" Goro wanted to dismiss this question, but something in it caught his attention. "I practiced the whole art," he said. "The stance, the draw, the breath, the release. The connection between intention and action." "Yes," the monk said. "And does this connection depend entirely on seeing every detail of the target? Or does it depend on something else that you have cultivated over 40 years? The monk stood to leave. Before departing, he said one more thing. "The body changes. This is not optional. But perhaps who we are is not located entirely in the body's specific capacities. Perhaps it is found in how we meet whatever capacities we have. After the monk left, Goro sat with these words. He had been so focused on what he was losing that he had not considered what remained. His eyes were weaker, yes, but his understanding of archery was deeper than it had ever been. His body knew the movements without thinking. His breath could still steady him. His years of practice had created a foundation that went beyond physical sharpness. That afternoon, Goro picked up his bow. Instead of trying to shoot at distant targets and becoming frustrated, he chose a closer target, one he could see clearly even with his fading vision. The target was larger, closer, but it was still a target. He could still practice the art. As he drew the bow, something released in his chest. He had been holding so much tension, so much grief about what he was losing. But in this moment, with this closer target, he could still feel the connection between intention and release. He could still experience the meditation of archery. The essence of his practice was not gone. It was just different. The arrow struck the center of the target. Not because of sharp eyesight, but because of deep practice. Because his body remembered even when his eyes could not see perfectly. Because the art of archery was not located only in vision, but in the whole integrated action of drawing and releasing. Over the following months, Goro adapted his practice. He shot at closer targets. He focused on teaching students, which required less physical demonstration and more transmission of understanding. He discovered that his love of archery did not die when his eyesight faded. It transformed into a different expression of the same devotion. Students began to say that Goro's teaching had become deeper, more profound. When he had relied on his perfect vision, he had sometimes been impatient with students who could not see as clearly as he could. But now, understanding the challenge of limited capacity, he taught with more compassion. He helped students find the art even when physical conditions were not ideal. One day, a young archer with excellent eyesight asked Goro, "How can you still teach archery when you cannot see the distant target yourself?" Goro smiled. "I am teaching archery now more purely than I did when my eyes were sharp. Then, I often confuse seeing clearly with understanding deeply. I thought the art was in hitting the distant target. But the art is in the quality of presence you bring to each moment of practice. The target is just a place to direct your attention. The real practice is in how you meet yourself in the act of drawing the bow." He paused, looking at the young archer. "Your eyes will fail eventually. Everyone's do. But if your practice depends only on sharp vision, you will lose it when your body changes. If your practice is rooted in something deeper, it can continue transforming through all the changes your body will bring." Years later, when Goro was quite old and his vision had faded further still, he no longer shot arrows at all. But he was still considered a master archer. Students came to learn from him not because he could demonstrate perfect shots, but because he embodied the spirit of the practice. He had learned to meet his body's changes without losing himself. He had discovered that impermanence does not destroy what matters most. It only asks us to find new forms for our devotion. The body is constantly teaching us about impermanence if we pay attention. Hair turns grey, skin wrinkles, joints stiffen, energy diminishes, healing takes longer. Sleep patterns shift. Digestion changes. Senses dull. These changes happen to everybody. They are not signs that something has gone wrong. They are signs that we are alive and living follows certain patterns we cannot escape. Young people often cannot hear this teaching. When the body is strong and capable, it seems like it will always be that way. Aging seems like something that happens to other people. But the body speaks the truth even when we are not listening. The changes are already happening. The slow transformation is always underway. The teaching of impermanence asks us to hold our bodies lightly, to appreciate what they can do right now without demanding they stay the same forever, to adapt when capacities change rather than mourning what is passing, to discover that who we really are is not tied to any particular physical ability, but to the awareness that meets whatever body we have with presence and care. The body shows us impermanence more honestly than anything else. It does not argue or philosophize. It simply changes. Hair falls out or turns white. Skin loses its elasticity. Muscles shrink. Bones become more brittle. Energy diminishes. These changes come whether we accept them or not. But our suffering about them depends entirely on our response. The body will continue teaching this lesson throughout our lives. With each passing year, it will show us more clearly that nothing stays the same. That all physical forms are temporary. That life lived in a body is life lived in constant change. We can resist this teaching and suffer, or we can accept it and discover a kind of freedom. When we stop demanding that the body remain as it is, we can finally be present for the body as it becomes. We can appreciate today's capacities without mourning yesterday's losses. We can adapt to new limitations without feeling diminished. We can continue engaging with life through whatever body we have, finding value and meaning not in unchanging ability, but in responsive presence. The breath you are breathing right now is happening in a body that will not last forever. The thoughts moving through your mind are arising in a brain that is aging with each passing moment. The awareness that witnesses all of this is experiencing life through a form that is constantly dying and being reborn, cell by cell, breath by breath, moment by moment. This is not sad. This is simply true. And when we can meet this truth without flinching, when we can let the body be exactly what it is, which is temporary and changing and honest, we discover a way of being embodied that is free from the constant fight against nature. We can be here, in this body, in this moment, without needing it to be anything other than what it actually is. The body is our most intimate teacher about impermanence. It speaks clearly, constantly, unavoidably. It shows us what every Buddhist teaching points toward. Nothing lasts. Everything changes. This form is not permanent. And in accepting this teaching fully, we find a peace that was never available through resistance. Breathe slowly now. Feel your chest rising and falling. Your body is breathing you without your conscious control. It has been doing this every moment of your life. Notice this body that carries you, that changes constantly, that will continue changing throughout your life. We have seen how places change, how people transform, how bodies shift and adapt. But there is another realm of impermanence that touches us even more intimately. The landscape of our own minds. The thoughts that arise and pass through our awareness. The emotions that color our experience. The mental states that seem so solid and permanent when we are caught inside them. Most of us believe our thoughts and feelings are substantial things. When we are anxious, the anxiety feels permanent, as if it has always been there and will always remain. When we are sad, we cannot imagine feeling happy again. When we are angry, the anger seems like a fixed fact about us, perhaps even part of our personality. We say things like, "I am an anxious person," or "I am depressed," as if these mental states define who we fundamentally are. But if we pay close attention to our actual experience, we notice something remarkable. Thoughts come and go. Emotions rise and fall. Mental states appear and disappear like weather moving across the sky. No thought has ever stayed permanently. No emotion has ever lasted forever. Even the most persistent worry, the deepest grief, the strongest joy moves through phases, intensifies and weakens, eventually gives way to something else. The mind is like the sky. Clouds pass through it. Sometimes the clouds are dark and heavy. Sometimes they are light and wispy. Sometimes they cover the entire sky. Sometimes there are no clouds at all. But the clouds are not the sky. They move through the sky. They appear and disappear. The sky itself remains, vast and open, holding whatever weather comes. Our thoughts and emotions are like those clouds. They are real while they are present. They affect our experience. But they are not permanent fixtures. They are passing phenomena, constantly arising and dissolving, replaced by new thoughts, new emotions, new mental weather. When we do not understand this, we suffer unnecessarily. We think our anxious thoughts are telling us eternal truths. We believe our sad feelings will never lift. We identify so strongly with our mental states that we cannot see past them. We forget that everything in the mind, like everything in the world, is impermanent. Here is a story about someone who learned this truth. In a university town, there lived a scholar named Akane who taught literature and history. She was respected for her knowledge and enjoyed her work. But beneath her competent exterior, Akane carried a constant companion that exhausted her: worry. She worried about everything. Her lectures, wondering if they were good enough. Her research, fearing it would be criticized. Her students, anxious that she was failing them somehow. Her colleagues, convinced they did not respect her. Her future, terrified that everything would fall apart. The worries were not always loud, but they were always present, a low hum of anxiety that colored every experience. Akane had worried for as long as she could remember. As a child, she worried about disappointing her parents. As a student, she worried about her grades. Now, as a teacher, she worried about her performance and reputation. The content of the worries changed over the years, but the worrying itself seemed permanent, an unchangeable part of who she was. She tried many things to escape the worry. She worked harder, thinking that perfect performance would finally quiet her fears. But achievement only brought temporary relief before new worries rushed in to fill the space. She tried distracting herself with busy activities, but the worry waited patiently beneath the distractions, ready to resurface the moment she slowed down. Akane began to believe that worry was simply her nature. She was a warrior. Some people were calm, others were anxious. She had been dealt the anxious temperament and would have to live with it forever. This belief itself became another layer of suffering. Not only did she have the worries, she also had the conviction that they would never end. One autumn, a traveling teacher came to the university to give a series of talks on meditation and Buddhist practice. Akane attended out of curiosity, though without much hope that anything could help her condition. The teacher was a monk named Tenshin, and he spoke about the impermanent nature of all mental phenomena. Thoughts arise and pass away, Tenshin said. Emotions come and go. Mental states appear and disappear. Nothing in the mind stays forever. But we forget this. We think our current mental state is permanent. We think our anxious thoughts are telling us eternal truths. We identify with our emotions and believe they define who we are. After the talk, Akane approached the monk. "I understand what you are saying as an idea," she told him. "But my anxiety is not like passing weather. It has been with me always. It is who I am." Tenshin looked at her with kind attention. "Is the anxiety exactly the same every moment of every day, or does it vary? Stronger sometimes, weaker other times? Present in some moments, less present in others?" Akane thought about this. She wanted to say the anxiety was constant and unchanging, but when she paid attention honestly, she had to admit it fluctuated. Some moments it was overwhelming. Other moments it was quieter. Occasionally, when she was deeply absorbed in work or conversation, it seemed to disappear entirely, though it always came back. "It varies," she admitted, "but it always returns. It has been my companion for so long, I cannot imagine being without it." "Then perhaps your practice is not to make the anxiety go away," Tenshin suggested. "Perhaps your practice is to watch it carefully, to notice how it arises, to notice how it changes, to notice how it passes, not to fight it or believe it, but simply to see it clearly as what it actually is. A passing phenomenon, like clouds in the sky." He paused, then added, "We suffer not because thoughts arise, but because we cling to them. We believe they are solid and permanent. We think they are telling us the truth about reality. But thoughts are just thoughts. They come and they go. When we can watch them without grasping or resisting, we discover they have much less power than we imagined." Tenshin taught Akane a simple practice. When worried thoughts arose, she should not try to push them away or convince herself they were wrong. Instead, she should simply notice them. A worried thought is appearing, she could observe silently. Then, she would watch what happened to that thought. Did it stay exactly the same? Or did it change, weaken, eventually disappear? At first, this practice felt impossible. When anxious thoughts arose, they felt absolutely real and permanent. They screamed for her attention, insisted she believe them, demanded she take action to prevent the catastrophes they predicted. How could she just watch them like weather passing through? But Akane persisted. When a worry about an upcoming lecture arose, instead of immediately spiraling into anxiety about all the ways she might fail, she paused. A worried thought is here, she noticed. She did not fight it. She did not feed it with more worried thinking. She just observed it. And something remarkable happened. When she stopped fueling the thought with her belief and attention, when she stopped treating it as a permanent truth, the thought began to change. It would intensify for a moment, as if protesting being ignored. Then it would gradually weaken. And then, sometimes quite quickly, it would dissolve entirely, replaced by some other thought or by a moment of quiet. This discovery astonished Akane. The worried thoughts that seemed so solid and permanent were actually quite fragile and temporary. They only seemed permanent because she kept recreating them, feeding them with her attention and belief. When she simply watched them without engaging, they passed through like clouds moving across the sky. Over weeks and months of practice, Akane's relationship with her mind transformed. She still experienced worried thoughts, but she no longer believed they were permanent features of who she was. She recognized them as passing mental weather. Some days the weather was stormy, filled with anxious thoughts. Other days it was calmer. But she learned not to identify with the weather. She was not her thoughts. She was the awareness that watched thoughts come and go. One day, a colleague asked Akane if she had changed in some way. "You seem more at ease," the colleague said. "Less tense." Akane smiled. "I am the same person with the same thoughts. But I have learned that thoughts are not permanent. They arise and they pass. I do not have to believe everything my mind tells me. I do not have to become every emotion that visits. This understanding has changed everything." The colleague looked puzzled. "But how do you just not believe your thoughts?" "When I am anxious, the anxiety feels completely real." "It is real," Akane agreed. "The anxiety is really there. But it is temporary. It came from somewhere, and it will go somewhere. When you remember this, when you see the thought or emotion as a passing visitor rather than a permanent resident, you can be with it without being consumed by it. You can let it move through without needing to make it stay or go away. Years later, when Akane herself began teaching meditation, she would tell her students, "The mind produces thoughts like the sky produces weather. This is not a problem. This is just what minds do." The suffering comes when we forget that mental weather is temporary and treat our current thoughts and emotions as if they will last forever. Practice is learning to watch the weather without believing you are the weather. Akane's story shows us something we often forget. Mental states are not permanent, even when they feel that way. Worry that seems eternal is actually a series of worried thoughts arising and passing. Depression that feels bottomless is actually a sequence of sad thoughts and heavy emotions, each one temporary, each one eventually giving way to something else. This teaching is not about forcing ourselves to think positively or pushing away uncomfortable thoughts. It is about recognizing what is actually happening in our minds. Thoughts arise. They last for some period of time. They fade. New thoughts arise. This cycle continues endlessly. No single thought ever stays permanently, no matter how compelling or terrible it seems while it is present. The same is true for emotions. Joy comes and goes. Anger rises and falls. Sadness deepens and lifts. Peace appears and disappears. We experience this constantly, but we often do not notice it because we are so caught up in the content of our mental experience that we miss its impermanent nature. Understanding this impermanence brings a particular kind of freedom. When we are suffering with difficult emotions or thoughts, we can remember that what we are experiencing is temporary. This moment of suffering will pass. It always does. This does not diminish the reality of the suffering while it is present, but it gives us perspective. It helps us not to compound our suffering by believing it will last forever. Another story can help us see this teaching from a different angle. In a small village surrounded by farmland, there lived a man named Shin, who served as a leader in the community. He helped resolve disputes, organized collective work projects, and generally tried to support the welfare of everyone in the village. It was often difficult work, dealing with competing interests and limited resources, and Shin frequently felt frustrated and uncertain about whether he was doing a good job. One spring evening, after a particularly hard day of trying to mediate a conflict between neighbors, Shin decided to take a walk. He left the village and walked into the surrounding hills as the sun was setting. He found a place to sit on a large rock overlooking the valley, and he just sat there, watching the last light fade from the sky. As he sat in silence, something unexpected happened. His usual mental chatter quieted. The worries about the village, the concerns about his decisions, the constant planning and analyzing, all of it settled. His mind became very still and clear. He felt a deep sense of peace that he had never experienced before. Everything seemed perfect just as it was. His problems, which had seemed so urgent and important an hour ago, now seemed small and manageable. He felt connected to everything around him, part of some larger wholeness that had always been there, but which he had been too busy to notice. Shin sat in this state for a long time, maybe an hour, maybe longer. He lost track of time. Finally, as darkness deepened, he walked back to the village. He felt transformed. He had touched something real, something profound. This feeling of peace and clarity was what he had been searching for without knowing it. This was how he wanted to feel all the time. Over the next few days, Shin tried to hold on to that special state. He wanted to get back to that feeling of peace and connection. He tried sitting in the same spot at the same time of evening. He tried recreating the circumstances that had been present when the experience occurred. But the more he tried to make the feeling return, the more it eluded him. He grew frustrated. Why had the peace come so easily that first evening, and now he could not find it again? He felt like he had been given a glimpse of something precious and then had it taken away. He began to feel worse than before the experience. At least before, he had not known what he was missing. Now he knew there was a better way to feel, but he could not access it. Shin mentioned his frustration to an old woman named Hisako who lived at the edge of the village. She was known for her quiet wisdom, and people often sought her counsel. When Shin described his experience and his inability to recreate it, Hisako listened carefully. "What you experienced was real," she said. "But you are now making a mistake that causes suffering." "What mistake?" Shin asked. "You are trying to make a temporary experience permanent. You are grasping at a mental state that arose and passed, and you are suffering because you cannot hold on to it." She paused, then continued. "All experiences are impermanent, including the good ones. That moment of peace you felt was genuine and valuable. But it was also temporary. It arose from certain conditions coming together. When those conditions changed, the experience changed. This is natural. This is how all mental states work." "But surely peace is better than anxiety," Shin protested. "Should I not try to cultivate the better state?" "You can certainly practice in ways that make peaceful states more likely to arise," Hisako agreed. "But you cannot grasp and hold any state permanently. The very act of grasping prevents the state from arising naturally. When you sat on that rock, you were not trying to achieve anything. You were simply present. The peace arose on its own. Now you are trying to force it to return, and this trying creates tension that prevents peace. She looked at Shin with compassionate understanding. Every mental state will pass. The anxious ones will pass. The peaceful ones will pass. Even the most profound insights come and go. When you understand this, you can appreciate good states while they are present without clinging to them when they fade. And you can endure difficult states knowing they too will pass. Shin thought about this teaching for several days. He recognized that he had been creating suffering by trying to hold on to a temporary experience. He had tasted peace and then spent his energy trying to trap it, to make it permanent. But peace, like everything else in the mind, was impermanent. It had come. It had gone. Other states had taken its place. He decided to try a different approach. Instead of trying to recreate that special evening, he simply sat quietly for a period each day without expecting any particular experience. Sometimes his mind was busy and agitated. Sometimes it was calmer. Sometimes he felt peaceful. Sometimes he felt restless. He learned to meet whatever arose without demanding it be different. Gradually, something shifted. By releasing his grip on the peak experience, by accepting the impermanent nature of all mental states, Shin discovered a different kind of peace. Not the dramatic stillness of that special evening, but a quieter acceptance of whatever was present. This acceptance was itself a kind of peace, more stable than the peak experience because it was not dependent on any particular state arising or persisting. Sometimes the profound peace would return, arising unexpectedly when conditions aligned. When it came, Shin appreciated it fully. When it passed, he did not chase it. He understood that all states come and go. His practice was not to achieve a permanent state of peace. His practice was to be present for whatever state was actually occurring, knowing that it too would pass. Years later, when someone asked Shin about that transformative evening on the hillside, he said, "That experience was a gift. It showed me what is possible." But the real teaching came afterward, when I learned that trying to hold on to that state was creating my suffering. Impermanence applies to the good experiences as well as the difficult ones. Everything passes. When we accept this completely, we find a peace that does not depend on any particular experience lasting forever. These two stories reveal the same truth about mental impermanence. Akane learned that difficult mental states do not last forever, even when they feel permanent. Shin learned that pleasant mental states also do not last, and trying to hold on to them creates suffering. Both discovered that all thoughts, emotions, and mental states are temporary phenomena, constantly arising and passing away. This teaching can be surprisingly hard to accept. When we are suffering, we want to believe there is a permanent escape, a state of peace we can achieve and then maintain forever. When we taste happiness or insight, we want to capture it and make it last. But this wanting itself creates tension and dissatisfaction. We are fighting against the nature of mental experience, which is to flow and change. The Buddha taught that clinging to impermanent things causes suffering. This applies directly to our mental states. When we cling to pleasant states, trying to make them last, we suffer when they inevitably fade. When we push away unpleasant states, refusing to accept their presence, we suffer from the resistance. The states themselves are not the problem. The clinging and resisting create the suffering. Liberation, in Buddhist teaching, does not mean achieving a permanent state of bliss. It means understanding the impermanent nature of all states so completely that we stop grasping at them. We can experience joy without needing to make it last. We can experience suffering without believing it will never end. We can be present for whatever is actually occurring without constantly wishing our mental weather were different. When we are caught inside a strong emotion or persistent thought pattern, we lose sight of this impermanence. The current state feels like all there is, like all there ever was, like all there ever will be. But if we can step back even slightly, if we can bring awareness to the process of experiencing rather than being completely absorbed in the content, we notice that everything is moving, changing, transforming. When we understand this deeply, we find a kind of freedom that does not depend on having only pleasant experiences. We can be with whatever arises, knowing it will pass. We can appreciate good states without clinging to them. We can endure difficult states without despair. We discover that beneath all the changing weather of thoughts and emotions, there is an awareness that remains, that can hold all experiences without being overwhelmed by them. This is the teaching of mental impermanence. Not that we should suppress our thoughts and emotions, but that we should recognize their temporary nature. Not that we should try to achieve permanent peace, but that we should accept the constant flowing of mental experience. Not that thoughts and feelings do not matter, but that they matter less than we think when we see them clearly as passing phenomena. As you rest with this teaching, notice the thoughts moving through your mind right now. Notice how they come and go. Notice how your emotional state shifts, subtly or dramatically, throughout your experience. Notice that nothing in your mental landscape stays fixed. Everything is flowing, arising and passing, appearing and disappearing. This is not a problem to solve. This is the nature of having a mind. And when we stop fighting this nature, when we accept the constant change in our mental experience, we discover a peace that was never available through trying to control or fix or freeze our thoughts and emotions. We discover that we can be present for the full range of human experience, knowing that all of it is temporary, all of it is passing through, none of it is who we ultimately are. Breathe deeply now. Feel whatever you are feeling. Whatever emotion or mental state is present right now, it is temporary. It came from somewhere and it will go somewhere. You do not need to push it away. You do not need to make it stay. You can simply be with it, knowing it is passing through. We have explored how everything changes. Places transform. People evolve. Bodies age. Thoughts and emotions arise and pass. We have seen the truth of impermanence from many angles. But understanding that things change is different from accepting that they change. And this difference, this gap between understanding and acceptance, is where much of our suffering lies. The pain we feel about impermanence does not come from the changes themselves. It comes from our resistance to those changes, from our desire for things to stay the same, from our clinging to what is passing away, from our refusal to let go of what is already gone. This is one of the core teachings of Buddhism. The second noble truth tells us that the cause of suffering is attachment, clinging, grasping. We want things to be permanent when they are not permanent. We want to hold on to what cannot be held. We want to freeze moments that are already flowing past. And this wanting, this grasping at what cannot be grasped, creates a particular kind of pain. When we cling tightly to people, trying to keep them exactly as they are, we suffer when they inevitably change. When we hold on to our own youth, refusing to accept aging, we suffer with each sign of time passing. When we grasp at pleasant experiences, trying to make them last forever, we suffer when they naturally end. The tighter we hold, the more we hurt. But there is another way. When we can release our grip, when we can accept change as the nature of things, when we can let go of what is passing without the added burden of resistance, we still feel loss, but we do not create extra suffering. We can be sad without being bitter. We can grieve without being destroyed. We can let things go without feeling like we are losing ourselves. This is not about becoming cold or detached. It is about loving with open hands instead of clenched fists. It is about appreciating what is here while it is here, without demanding it stay forever. It is about flowing with life's changes rather than standing rigid against them, being broken by their inevitable arrival. Consider a story that shows what happens when we try to hold too tightly. In a village known for its craftspeople, there lived a widow named Etsuko, whose husband had been a master woodworker. For 30 years, they had worked together. He would craft beautiful furniture and tools in his workshop behind their house, and she would manage the business, talking with customers, keeping accounts, organizing deliveries. They had been partners in every sense, building a life together piece by piece. When Etsuko's husband died suddenly one winter, her grief was profound and natural. She had lost her companion, her partner, half of herself. The house felt empty without his presence. The silence where his voice had been was almost unbearable. This pain was the price of having loved deeply, and it was real and valid. But Etsuko's grief took a particular shape that created additional suffering. She could not bear to change anything in his workshop. She left it exactly as it had been on the day he died. His tools hung on the wall in their usual places. His workbench held the project he had been completing. Sawdust still lay on the floor where it had fallen. She would not let anyone enter the workshop. She would not touch anything inside it. She kept it frozen, preserved, as if by keeping the space unchanged, she could somehow keep her husband present. She also refused to sell any of his work that remained in their storage. Customers came asking to purchase pieces he had made, and she turned them all away. These objects were all she had left of him. If she let them go out into the world, she would lose even more of what little remained. The years passed. 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. Etsuko lived in the house with her husband's workshop frozen in time behind it. She would sit sometimes at the window, looking at the closed workshop door, remembering how he would emerge from it covered in sawdust, smiling at some small success in his work. The workshop began to deteriorate. Weather seeped in through small cracks. Moisture warped some of the wood. The tools, unused, began to rust. But Etsuko could not bring herself to maintain the space. That would mean acknowledging that he was gone, that things had changed, that time was passing. She preferred to let everything slowly decay rather than accept the truth of loss. People in the village worried about Etsuko. They saw her becoming more isolated, more fixed in her grief. But when they tried to talk with her about moving forward, she would become defensive. She was not holding on to the past, she insisted. She was honoring her husband's memory. She was being faithful to what they had shared. One spring, a young woman named Yui arrived in the village seeking an apprenticeship. She wanted to learn woodworking and had heard that Etsuko's late husband had been a master. Yui came to the house and asked if Etsuko would consider letting her learn from the tools and unfinished work in the workshop. "My husband is gone," Etsuko said coldly. "His workshop is closed." "I understand," Yui said gently. "But his knowledge does not have to be gone. If I could study his tools, his techniques, the work he left behind, something of what he knew could continue. Is that not a kind of honoring?" "You do not understand," Etsuko said. "If I let anyone into that workshop, if I let anything change, I will lose what little I have left of him." Yui nodded and left without arguing. But she returned several weeks later with a different question. "May I ask you about your husband's work? Not to enter the workshop, just to hear you talk about what he did?" Etsuko hesitated. She had not talked about her husband's work in years. It hurt too much. But something in Yui's sincere interest made her agree. They sat together and Etsuko found herself describing the different types of wood her husband had preferred, the tools he had crafted himself, the particular techniques that had made his work distinctive. As she spoke, something unexpected happened. The memories brought pain, yes, but they also brought warmth. She had been so busy trying to preserve the physical space exactly as it was that she had stopped actually remembering her husband. She had been protecting the workshop like a tomb rather than celebrating the life and skill it represented. Yui came back again and again over the following months, always with questions, always genuinely interested. Slowly, Etsuko began to see her husband's work differently. The tools hanging unused on the wall, rusting. The unfinished projects that would never be completed. The stored furniture that no one would ever use. She had thought keeping everything frozen was honoring him. But maybe she was actually dishonoring him by letting his life's work decay unused. One day, Etsuko made a decision that frightened her. She told Yui she could enter the workshop. They would clean it together. They would restore the tools. They would complete the unfinished projects if possible. And Yui could learn from what was there. Opening the workshop door after 15 years was one of the hardest things Etsuko had ever done. It felt like a betrayal, like she was finally admitting her husband was truly gone. But as she and Yui began to clean, as they carefully restored the tools and workspace, something shifted in Etsuko's heart. She was not erasing her husband by allowing change. She was honoring him differently. By letting his tools be used again, by allowing his knowledge to pass to someone new, by permitting his work to go out into the world and serve people, she was letting his life continue to have meaning. The frozen, decaying workshop had been a monument to death. The restored, active workshop was a tribute to life. They completed several of the unfinished projects together. When they were done, Etsuko made another difficult decision. She would sell some of her husband's stored work to people who would use and cherish it. Keeping everything locked away had not kept her husband present. It had only kept his absence more painful. The first time someone came to take away a piece her husband had made, Etsuko felt a sharp pain in her chest. This was loss, real loss. But beneath the pain, she felt something else. Relief. A loosening. She had been holding so tightly for so long, and now she was learning to open her hands. Over the following year, Etsuko's life slowly transformed. She did not forget her husband or stop missing him. but she stopped trying to keep everything frozen in place. She allowed his workshop to become a living space again, where Yui practiced and learned. She allowed his work to move out into the world. She allowed time to pass and things to change without fighting every change as if it were a betrayal. One day, Yui completed her first major project under Etsuko's guidance, a chair made using techniques Etsuko's husband had developed. As they looked at the finished chair, Yui said, "Your husband's knowledge lives on. Through you teaching me, through his tools still being used, his skill continues." Etsuko felt tears in her eyes, but they were different tears than the ones she had cried for 15 years. "I thought I was keeping him alive by keeping everything the same," she said quietly. "But I was actually making a grave of his life's work. Now, by letting things change, by letting his tools be used and his techniques be taught, something of him does continue. Not frozen and dead, but alive and growing." She paused, touching the chair Yui had made. "I have learned something hard but necessary. Holding tight does not prevent loss. It only makes the loss more painful. When I finally opened my hands and let things change, I did not lose my husband more than I had already lost him. I just stopped suffering so much from the losing." Etsuko's story shows us clearly how clinging to permanence creates suffering. Her grief was natural and understandable. But her refusal to accept change, her attempt to keep everything frozen exactly as it was, added years of additional pain to the original loss. She suffered not just from her husband's death, but from her resistance to accepting that death and allowing life to continue. This pattern appears in countless forms in our lives. We try to keep relationships exactly as they are, refusing to let them evolve, and we suffer when they inevitably change anyway. We cling to our self-image from younger years, and we suffer with every sign of aging. We want our children to stay children, and we suffer as they grow and become independent. We demand that our circumstances remain stable, and we suffer when life brings unexpected changes. The Buddha did not teach that we should not care about things or people. He taught that clinging to them, grasping at them, demanding they remain permanent when they are not permanent, creates suffering. There is a difference between loving someone and clutching at them, between appreciating something and demanding it never change, between engaging fully with life and grasping desperately at moments as they pass. When we love with open hands, we can fully appreciate what is here while it is here without the added suffering of refusing to let it go when it passes. We can grieve losses without the extra layer of pain that comes from believing those losses should not have happened. We can accept change as part of life, rather than experiencing every change as a personal betrayal. There is another form of clinging that creates suffering. Sometimes we hold on to not a person or object, but a moment. A time in our lives when things felt right, when we were successful or happy or at our best. We try to recreate that moment or return to that state, and we suffer because we cannot. Here is a story that reveals this truth. In a city known for its textile trade, there lived a woman named Hotaru who had built a successful business dyeing fabrics. She had developed a particular shade of indigo blue that became very fashionable. For several years, everyone wanted fabric in Hotaru's blue. Wealthy families ordered it for their clothing. Merchants traveled from distant cities to purchase her dyed cloth. She employed many workers and earned respect and prosperity. Those were golden years for Hotaru. She felt successful admired, secure. Her skill was recognized. Her work was valued. She had found her place in the world, and it was good. She allowed herself to think that this success was permanent, that she had established something that would continue forever. But fashions change. Gradually, people began to prefer other colors. Green became popular. Then, burgundy. Then, patterns rather than solid colors. Hotaru's blue, which had seemed timelessly elegant, began to look dated. Orders decreased. Customers stopped coming. The workers she had employed found other work. Her workshop, which had been busy and profitable, became quiet. At first, Hotaru told herself this was temporary. Fashion would swing back to her blue. She just needed to wait. She continued dyeing fabric in the same color, storing it, sure that demand would return. But months passed, and the demand did not return. A year passed. 2 years. Hotaru became bitter. The world had turned against her for no good reason. Her blue was objectively beautiful. People were foolish to prefer these other colors. She refused to adapt, to learn new techniques, to develop new shades. She had been successful doing what she did. That success should have lasted. The fact that it did not last felt like an injustice. She spent her savings maintaining her workshop and continuing to produce the blue fabric that no one wanted. She kept everything exactly as it had been during her successful years, as if by refusing to change, she could somehow make the world change back. Her workshop became a museum to her past glory, unchanged while everything around her evolved. A young dyer named Maiko, who had briefly worked for Hotaru during the prosperous times, came to visit. She had started her own small dyeing business and was doing well by learning new techniques and responding to changing fashions. When she saw Hotaru's workshop, still producing the same blue that no one wanted, she felt concerned. "Hotaru-san," Maiko said carefully, "I have learned some new dyeing methods. Would you like me to share them with you? We could work together to develop new colors." Hotaru's face hardened. "I do not need new methods. My technique is excellent. The problem is not with my work. The problem is with people who have stopped appreciating quality." "But the market has changed," Maiko said gently. "Is it not better to change with it than to keep producing what people no longer want?" "If I change," Hotaru said, her voice sharp, "then I admit that those successful years are truly gone. I admit that I was only briefly good at what I do, and now I must start over with new techniques like a beginner. I refuse to accept that." Maiko left, troubled by her former employer's rigidity. But she came back periodically, hoping to help. On one visit, she brought samples of new colors she had developed. Beautiful shades that incorporated traditional techniques with new approaches. She hoped seeing the work might inspire Hotaru. But Hotaru barely looked at the samples. "This is not real dyeing," she said. "During my successful years, I did real dyeing. This is just chasing after whatever people want this week." "Is it chasing?" Maiko asked quietly. "Or is it adapting? Is it abandoning your skill, or is it applying your skill in new ways?" After Maiko left, Hotaru sat alone in her workshop surrounded by bolts of blue fabric no one wanted. She was running out of money. She would soon have to close the workshop entirely. But still, she could not bring herself to change. Changing would mean accepting that her golden years were truly over. It would mean admitting that success is temporary. It would mean letting go of the identity she had built during those years as the master of that particular blue. One night, unable to sleep, Hotaru walked through her quiet workshop. She looked at all the stored fabric, years of work that had no buyer. She looked at the dyeing vats, rarely used now. She looked at the empty spaces where workers had once labored. And she realized something that made her want to cry. She had been so busy trying to preserve her past success that she had destroyed her present life. She had stopped being a dyer. She had become a curator of her own memory. She was producing blue fabric not because anyone wanted it, but because admitting no one wanted it would mean accepting that things had changed. The next morning, Hotaru did something that terrified her. She went to find Maiko. When they met, Hotaru said simply, "Will you teach me the new techniques?" "I am ready to learn." Maiko looked at her former employer with surprise and respect. "Of course. But may I ask what changed?" Hotaru was quiet for a moment. "I realized I have been clinging to a moment in time that is gone. Those successful years happened. They were real. But they are over. By refusing to accept that they are over, I have made myself unable to have any new success. I have been choosing a dead past over a living present." She paused, then added, "I am afraid. Learning new things at my age, starting over in some ways. But I am more afraid of spending the rest of my life trying to inhabit a moment that no longer exists." Over the following months, Hotaru learned new dyeing techniques. She was not as quick to learn as she had been when she was younger, and this humbled her. She had to accept being less skilled, less certain, less masterful than she had been in her area of expertise. This was painful, but it was also freeing. She was no longer trapped in the past. She was engaged with the present. The fabrics she eventually began producing were different from her old work. They showed both her traditional skill and the new techniques she had learned. They were not better or worse than her famous blue. They were simply different. And people began to buy them. Hotaru never became as successful as she had been during her golden years. Those years of peak prosperity did not return. But she built a modest, sustainable business. More importantly, she was alive again. She was learning, growing, adapting. She was meeting life as it actually was, rather than demanding it be what it once had been. Years later, someone asked Hotaru about her famous blue. "Do you ever make it anymore?" "Sometimes," Hotaru said, "when someone specifically requests it. But I no longer see it as the only thing I can do. That blue was perfect for one moment in time. But time passed. I can either spend my life trying to return to that moment, which is impossible, or I can find out what this moment asks of me." She smiled. "I wasted years clinging to past success, refusing to accept it was over. I created so much suffering for myself. Not from losing the success, which was simply impermanence doing what impermanence does, but from refusing to let it go. The moment I opened my hand and released my grip on the past, I could finally receive what the present was offering." Both Etsuko and Hotaru show us the same teaching from different angles. Etsuko clung to a person who was gone. Hotaru clung to a moment that had passed. Both created years of suffering by refusing to accept change, by trying to keep things frozen when everything in life is flowing. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of the impermanence teaching. not just to understand that things change, but to release our resistance to that change, to stop fighting against the nature of reality, to open the hands that want to grasp and hold and keep everything exactly as it is or was. The Buddha taught that this grasping, this clinging, this resistance to change is at the root of our suffering. We grasp at pleasure, trying to make it last. We grasp at youth, fighting against aging. We grasp at success, refusing to accept when it fades. We grasp at people, demanding they stay exactly as they are. We grasp at our own self-image, resisting any evolution or change. And all this grasping creates tension, creates pain, creates suffering that goes beyond the natural sadness of loss. There is a difference between loving something and grasping at it. When we love with open hands, we appreciate fully what is here while it is here. We engage deeply with people, experiences, moments, but we do not demand that they stay forever. We do not resist when they naturally change or end. We feel grief when they go, but we do not add the extra suffering of believing they should not have gone. When we grasp, when we cling, when we resist change, we cannot be fully present. We are too busy trying to make things stay the same. We are too busy fighting against what is happening. We are too busy mourning what is passing to appreciate what is still here. The teaching of impermanence is not just that things change. It is that our resistance to change causes unnecessary suffering. When we can accept change as the nature of existence, when we can release our grip on what is passing, when we can let go with some measure of grace, we still experience loss, but we do not multiply that loss through resistance. This is one of the deepest practices in Buddhism. Learning to hold things lightly, learning to love without grasping, learning to appreciate without demanding permanence, learning to let go when it is time to let go. Not because we do not care, but because we understand the nature of reality and we choose to flow with it rather than against it. This is the practice the teaching of impermanence invites us to. Not to stop loving or caring, but to love and care with open hands. To appreciate what is here while it is here. To let go when it is time to let go. To flow with change rather than standing rigid against it. To accept that nothing lasts, and to find in that acceptance not despair, but a deeper engagement with the precious temporary moment we are actually living. Take a moment now to notice what you might be holding on to. A memory of how things used to be. An identity from an earlier time in your life. A wish for circumstances to return to how they were. Feel what it is like to hold tightly to these things. And then, just for this moment, see what it feels like to soften your grip, even slightly. We have seen how impermanence touches everything. We have explored the suffering that comes from resisting change. But there is another way to meet this truth. A way that does not just accept impermanence, but actually appreciates it. Even finds beauty in it. In Japanese culture, there is a concept called wabi-sabi. It refers to an aesthetic sensibility that finds beauty in imperfection, in incompleteness, and especially in impermanence. The weathered wood, the cracked tea bowl, the fallen leaves, the cherry blossoms that bloom briefly and then scatter. These things are not beautiful despite their impermanence. They are beautiful because of it. This way of seeing reverses our usual thinking. We typically believe that things should be new, perfect, permanent to be valuable. We want objects that last forever. We want youth that does not fade. We want experiences that go on and on. We think permanence equals worth. But wabi-sabi teaches something different. It suggests that the temporary nature of things is exactly what makes them precious. The cherry blossoms would not move us so deeply if they bloomed forever. We treasure them because they last only a few weeks each year. Their brevity is part of their beauty. A sunset is magnificent partly because it lasts only minutes before darkness comes. The seasons are meaningful because they change. When we truly understand this, we begin to see everything differently. The lines appearing on our face tell the story of years lived. The worn path through a garden shows where countless feet have walked. The crack in an old cup reveals its history of use. These marks of time passing are not defects. They are evidence of life being lived, of objects being used, of existence unfolding as it naturally does. This teaching asks us to shift our relationship with impermanence completely. Instead of mourning what fades, we can appreciate the fading itself. Instead of resisting age and wear, we can see them as adding character and depth. Instead of wanting everything to stay new forever, we can value the beauty that only comes with time passing. What follows is a story about someone who discovered this way of seeing. In a village surrounded by mountains, there lived a young woman named Mizuki who wanted to be a poet. She had studied poetry since childhood, reading all the classical works she could find. She wanted to write verses that would be considered great, that would last through the ages, that would make her name remembered forever. But Mizuki struggled with her writing. Everything she created felt flat and lifeless. She could construct verses with proper form and elegant language, but they lacked something essential. They felt empty, like beautiful shells with nothing inside. Her teacher, an old poet named Basho, would read her work and nod politely, but say little. She knew this meant the work was technically correct, but not truly poetry. One spring morning, Basho told Mizuki to stop writing for a while. Instead, she should spend an entire day simply observing. "Go and watch," he said. "Pay attention to what you see. Notice what moves you, but do not write. Just look." Mizuki felt frustrated by this instruction. How would watching help her write better poetry? She needed to practice writing, not waste time looking at things. But she respected her teacher and agreed to try. She left the village at dawn and walked into the surrounding hills. The morning was clear and beautiful. Spring had arrived and everything was blooming. Cherry trees covered the hillsides in clouds of pink and white blossoms. The sight was stunning, like something from a painting. But Mizuki had seen cherry blossoms every spring of her life. They were lovely, but familiar. What was she supposed to notice? She found a place to sit beneath a large cherry tree and began to observe as her teacher had instructed. At first, her mind was busy with thoughts about her poetry, her ambitions, her frustrations. But gradually, as she sat in silence, her attention settled on what was actually before her. She noticed how the blossoms moved in the breeze, how light passed through the petals, how each flower was slightly different from the others. She watched insects visiting the blooms. She listened to birds calling from the branches. She noticed the texture of the bark, rough and dark beneath the delicate flowers. As the morning wore on, something began to happen that surprised her. The wind picked up slightly, and blossoms started to fall. One petal, then another. then a small shower of petals drifting down like snow. They fell on her hair, her shoulders, the ground around her. The tree was releasing its flowers. Mizuki had seen cherry blossoms fall before, of course, but she had never really watched it, never sat still and paid full attention to this particular moment of letting go. She noticed how each petal fell in its own way. Some spiraled down, some drifted, some fell straight and quick. They landed on the grass, on stones, in a small stream nearby where they floated away. As she watched, something shifted in her chest. A feeling rose up that she could not quite name. It was not exactly sadness, though there was sadness in it. It was not exactly joy, though there was joy too. It was a kind of poignant recognition. These flowers were so beautiful precisely because they were falling. Their perfection lasted only moments. They bloomed for a brief time and then let go. This releasing was not failure. It was completion. It was the natural arc of their existence. She thought about all the poems she had read about cherry blossoms. The classical poets had written about them constantly, returning to them again and again. She had always assumed they wrote about cherry blossoms because the flowers were pretty. But sitting here, watching the petals fall, she understood something deeper. The poets were not just celebrating beauty. They were recognizing impermanence. The cherry blossoms showed the truth of all existence in a form so beautiful it was almost unbearable. Mizuki sat under the tree for hours, watching the slow rain of petals. By afternoon, the ground was covered in a soft carpet of pink and white. The tree, which had been full and glorious in the morning, was now half bare. Its moment of peak bloom had passed, and this passing was as beautiful as the blooming had been. When she finally walked back to the village that evening, Mizuki understood something she had not understood before. She had been trying to write poetry about eternal truths, timeless beauty, things that would last forever. But poetry was not about the permanent. It was about the temporary. It was about capturing a moment that was already passing. It was about holding up the truth of impermanence in a form that let others see it clearly. That night, she wrote a poem. It was very simple, just a few lines about cherry blossoms falling into a stream and floating away. Nothing profound or complicated. Just what she had seen, what she had felt, the moment of beauty and letting go. When she showed the poem to Basho the next day, his face changed as he read it. He looked up at her with something like recognition. "Now you are beginning to understand," he said. "This is poetry." "But it is so simple," Mizuki said. "Just blossoms falling. Nothing important." "Everything important is in those falling blossoms," Basho replied. "Birth and death, beauty and loss, the whole truth of existence. You finally stopped trying to write about eternal things and wrote about what is actually real. What is real is always temporary. This is what poetry has to capture." Over the following months, Mizuki's writing transformed. She stopped trying to write verses that would last forever and started writing about moments that were already passing. A morning mist burning off a field. An old dog sleeping in a patch of sun. Footprints in snow beginning to melt. Each poem captured something temporary, something that existed only briefly and then was gone. And paradoxically, by writing about the temporary, her poems began to feel more lasting. They held truths that did not change precisely because they accepted that everything changes. Years later, When Mizuki had become a respected poet herself, students would ask her how to write good poetry. She would tell them, "Do not try to write about things that last forever. Nothing lasts forever. Write about things as they are passing. Find the beauty in fading, in ending, in letting go. The most enduring art is made from the most temporary materials. Words that capture impermanence somehow escape impermanence themselves." She would often add, "I wasted years trying to write about eternity." But eternity is an abstraction. What is real is this moment, this breath, this flower that is already beginning to fade. When we can see the beauty in that, when we can honor the temporary instead of resenting it, we discover what poetry actually is. We discover what life actually is. Mizuki discovered what the aesthetic tradition of wabi-sabi teaches. That impermanence is not a flaw to be overlooked, but a source of beauty to be appreciated. The cherry blossoms are treasured throughout Japanese culture, not despite their brief bloom, but because of it. Their transience is inseparable from their beauty. This way of seeing applies to everything. A face marked by time tells a story that a young face cannot tell. An old building weathered by decades carries a character that a new building lacks. A well-used tool shaped by years of hands has a presence that a factory-fresh object does not possess. The marks of impermanence are marks of authenticity, of life lived, of time passing honestly. When we can see this way, aging becomes interesting rather than tragic. We notice the silver in hair, the lines around eyes, the weathering of skin as signatures of experience. We see objects not as things that should stay pristine, but as participants in time, gathering stories, developing patina, becoming more themselves through use and age. The teaching goes even deeper. Things are precious because they do not last. If cherry blossoms bloomed forever, we would stop noticing them. If youth lasted eternally, we would not treasure it. If moments went on indefinitely, we would not be present for them. Impermanence creates urgency, creates attention, creates appreciation. We treasure what we know will pass. Think about your own experience. Which moments stand out most vividly in your memory? Often they are moments when you were aware, consciously or unconsciously, that something was ending or changing. The last day of a trip, a child's graduation, a final conversation with someone before a parting. These moments are vivid precisely because we knew they were temporary. The impermanence made us pay attention. Another story can deepen our understanding of this truth. In a workshop on the edge of a forest, there lived an old craftsman named Takeshi who made furniture from wood. He had been working with wood for over 60 years, and his pieces were sought after throughout the region. But Takeshi's furniture was unusual. Unlike other craftsmen who tried to make pieces that looked perfect and new, Takeshi created furniture that was designed to show its age. He used techniques that allowed the wood to move and shift over time. He left surfaces unfinished so they would develop color and texture through use and exposure. He designed joints that would show slight gaps as the wood aged. His pieces did not fight against time. They welcomed it. When people first purchased Takeshi's furniture, some were disappointed. It did not look as pristine as the furniture from other makers. It already showed the marks of being handmade, slightly imperfect, openly showing its construction. Why would they pay good money for something that was not perfectly polished and uniform? But Takeshi would tell them, You are not buying furniture that looks good on the day you bring it home. You are buying furniture that will become more beautiful as you live with it. Give it 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Then you will see what I am making." And he was right. After years of use, Takeshi's furniture transformed. The wood darkened and developed a rich patina that no finish could replicate. The slight gaps he had left room for became part of the character as the wood expanded and contracted with seasons. The surface texture that came from hands touching the wood day after day, from objects being placed and removed, from life being lived around these pieces, created a depth of beauty that new furniture could never possess. People would sometimes bring other furniture to show Takeshi, expensive pieces from famous makers, perfectly constructed and finished. "Look how perfect this is," they would say. "Every joint is invisible. Every surface is flawless." Takeshi would nod appreciatively. "That is excellent craftsmanship," he would agree. "But I wonder what it will look like in 20 years. Will age add to its beauty or diminish it? Has the maker designed it to welcome time or to resist time?" He would run his hand over his own work, pieces he had made decades earlier. "This table has been used every day for 30 years. You can see the wear near the edges where hands have gripped it. You can see the fading where sun has touched it. You can see the marks of life lived around it. These marks make it more beautiful, not less. This is what I am trying to create. Furniture that participates in time rather than fighting against it." A young carpenter named Hiro came to study with Takeshi. At first, Hiro struggled to understand what his teacher was doing. He had learned that good woodworking meant perfect joints, smooth finishes, pristine surfaces. But Takeshi seemed almost careless, leaving things unfinished, allowing imperfections. "Why do you not sand this more smoothly?" Hiro would ask. Or, "Should we not fill this gap?" Takeshi would smile patiently. "I am not making furniture for the moment it leaves my workshop. I am making furniture for years from now. That gap will close and open with the seasons. That rough texture will be smoothed by 1,000 hands. I am leaving room for time to finish what I start." One day, an elderly woman came to the workshop with a chair Takeshi had made for her parents 50 years earlier. The chair had been used daily by her family. It was worn, weathered, marked by decades of life. But it was also beautiful in a way that took Hiro's breath away. The wood glowed with a depth of color he had never seen. The surface had a texture that seemed almost alive. The piece carried a presence, a dignity that came from having been truly lived with. "Can you repair it?" the woman asked. "Some of the joints have loosened." Takeshi examined the chair carefully, his old hands moving over it with recognition and affection. "I remember making this piece," he said. "Your father came to me when he was first married. I can repair the joints. But I want you to see something first." He pointed out details to Hiro. The way the wood had darkened unevenly, creating subtle patterns. The wear on the armrests where thousands of hands had gripped. The slight depression in the seat from decades of sitting. The marks on the legs where someone had habitually rested their feet. "This chair has become beautiful through use," Takeshi said. "Through time passing. Through life being lived. When I made it, it was just wood and joints. Now it is something more. It carries stories in its grain. It has become itself through aging. After the woman left with her repaired chair, Hiro said to Takeshi, "I understand now what you are teaching. You are making furniture that honors impermanence. That welcomes time passing instead of trying to stay frozen." "Yes," Takeshi said. "Most makers try to create things that resist time, that fight against aging and wear. But I am trying to create things that accept time, that participate in time, that become more themselves as they age. This is harder because you have to imagine what something will become, not just what it is." He paused, looking at his weathered hands. "I am old now. My body shows the marks of decades of work. Some people would say I am worn out, diminished by age. But I think I am more myself now than I was at 20. Experience has shaped me. Time has revealed what was always there beneath the surface. This is what I try to build into my furniture. The capacity to be shaped by time in ways that add rather than subtract." Hiro worked with Takeshi for many years, learning not just techniques, but a whole philosophy of making. When he eventually opened his own workshop, he created furniture in the same spirit. Pieces designed to welcome time, to show their age honestly, to become more beautiful through use and wear. People would sometimes ask Hiro why his furniture did not look as perfect as other makers' work. He would say, "I am not making furniture to look at. I am making furniture to live with. Give it time. Let it be used. Let it age. Then judge if it is beautiful." And those who kept his pieces found that Takeshi's teaching was true. The furniture became more beautiful with time. It developed character that new things cannot have. It participated in the lives of the families who used it, gathering stories, marking time, showing honestly the passage of years. And this honesty, this acceptance of impermanence, was its deepest beauty. Both Mizuki and Takeshi teach the same truth. Beauty is not found in resisting impermanence, but in accepting it. The cherry blossoms are beautiful because they fall. The furniture becomes beautiful because it shows its age. Poetry captures moments precisely because those moments are passing. When we try to make things eternal, we miss their actual beauty, which lives in their temporariness. This shift in seeing changes everything. We stop trying to make ourselves look ageless and start appreciating the face we have earned through living. We stop trying to keep everything pristine and start valuing the marks of use. We stop mourning endings and start recognizing them as completions. We stop resisting change and start seeing change as the process through which beauty emerges. Think of the things you treasure most. Often they are not the newest or most perfect things. They are things that carry history. The book, worn from many readings. The path smoothed by countless footsteps. The photograph faded by time. The quilt patched and mended. These things are precious, not despite their imperfection, but because of it. They show time passing. They show life lived. When we understand impermanence this way, we can finally be present for life as it actually is. We can appreciate this moment knowing it will pass, and this knowing makes us pay attention more carefully. We can love this person knowing they are temporary, and this knowing makes our love more tender. We can engage with this experience knowing it will end, and this knowing makes us more fully present. The beauty of fading things teaches us that impermanence is not the enemy of value. It is the source of value. Nothing would matter if everything lasted forever. We treasure the temporary precisely because it is temporary. The sunset is magnificent for minutes before darkness comes. The season is meaningful because it yields to the next season. Life itself is precious because it ends. When we can see this way, impermanence stops being something to fear or mourn. It becomes something to appreciate, even to celebrate. We understand that the marks of time passing are not defects, but distinctions. That aging is not decay, but development. That endings are not failures, but completions. The teaching asks us to shift from fighting impermanence to appreciating it, to see that life's beauty lives precisely in its transience, to understand that we treasure things not despite their temporary nature, but because of it. This shift in perception is profound. It changes not just how we see the world, but how we live in it. We have explored impermanence from many angles. We have seen how everything changes. We have recognized that resisting change creates suffering. We have discovered that impermanence can be a source of beauty rather than only loss. But there remains one essential question. How does this teaching actually change how we live? Understanding impermanence is not just philosophical knowledge. It is not just something to think about or agree with intellectually. When the teaching truly sinks in, when we really grasp that everything is temporary, it transforms how we move through our days, how we relate to people, how we spend our time, how we hold our possessions, how we meet each moment. Someone who deeply understands impermanence lives differently than someone who believes things should be permanent. They make different choices. They have different priorities. They carry themselves with a different quality, not heavy with grasping and fear, but lighter, more present, more free. This lightness does not come from not caring. It comes from caring deeply while also accepting the temporary nature of everything we care about. It is the freedom that comes from releasing the impossible task of making impermanent things permanent. The peace that comes from flowing with change rather than fighting against it. When we truly understand that nothing lasts, we stop wasting time on things that do not matter. We stop holding grudges because we know life is too short for sustained resentment. We forgive more easily because we recognize that everyone is changing, including the person who hurt us and ourselves. We express love more openly because we know the people we love will not be here forever. We appreciate ordinary moments more because we recognize they are not repeating. This conversation will never happen again exactly like this. This meal shared with these people on this day is unique. This sunrise is the only sunrise of this particular morning. When we see clearly that each moment is unrepeatable, we pay attention more carefully. We are more present, more engaged, more alive. The teaching of impermanence, fully understood and embodied, does not lead to sadness or detachment. It leads to deeper engagement, to fuller presence, to more tender care for what is here while it is here. Someone who understands impermanence loves more freely, lives more fully, and suffers less from the inevitable changes that life brings. What follows is a story about someone who embodied this understanding. On the roads between villages and towns, there lived a monk named Rio who spent most of his time traveling. He had no fixed home, no monastery to return to. He would walk from place to place, sometimes staying in temples for a few nights, sometimes sleeping under trees, sometimes invited into homes by people who offered hospitality to wandering monks. Rio owned almost nothing. A robe, a bowl for receiving food, a few small items of necessity. Everything he possessed could be carried easily. When people remarked on how little he had, he would smile and say, "I have everything I need." More than that would just be burden. In one village where Rio stopped for a few days, he met a merchant named Goemon who owned a large house filled with valuable possessions. Goemon was curious about this monk who seemed content with nothing. He invited Rio to have tea and asked him directly, "Does it not trouble you to have so little? Do you not want a home? Security? Things to call your own?" Rio thought about this question carefully before answering. "I have a home," he said. "Wherever I am is my home. I have security. I trust that each day will bring what I need. And I have things of my own. This robe, this bowl. What more should I want?" "But what about your future?" Goemon pressed. "When you are old, who will care for you? What will you live on?" "The future is not here yet," Rio said gently. "I cannot live in it now. When the future arrives, it will be the present, and I will meet it then. Worrying about it now does not make it easier. It only makes this moment heavier." Goemon shook his head. "That is foolish. A wise person prepares, accumulates, builds security so that when difficulties come, they are protected." "Perhaps," Rio said. "But tell me, do you feel secure? With your large house and many possessions, do you feel safe?" Goemon had to admit he did not. He worried constantly about his property, about thieves, about fire, about the value of his goods, about whether he had enough, about losing what he had. His possessions did not bring him peace. They brought him anxiety. "I do not own many things because I understand that I cannot keep anything," Rio explained. "One day I will die. Everything I possess will be left behind. Even this body will be left behind. Knowing this, why should I spend my life accumulating things I cannot ultimately keep? Why should I carry more than necessary on a journey that must end?" He sipped his tea before continuing. "This does not mean possessions are bad or wrong. If you need a house, have a house. If you need tools for your work, have tools. But there is a difference between using things and being attached to them. Between having what you need and grasping at security that does not truly exist." Goemon felt uncomfortable with these words. Everything in his life was built on accumulation, on building security through possessions. The monk's words suggested that this entire effort was based on an illusion. "What about your family?" Goemon asked. "Did you not leave behind people who needed you?" "I had no family," Rio said. "But I understand your question. You are asking if my way of life is selfish. If refusing to accumulate and cling means refusing to care for others." He set down his teacup. "I care for others everywhere I go. I teach when people ask. I help with work when work is needed. I listen when someone needs listening. My relationships do not depend on living in one place or owning many things. I meet people fully while I am with them. I part from them when it is time to part. I do not grasp at keeping them with me forever because I know that is impossible." "That sounds lonely," Goemon said. "Does it?" Rio asked. I have never felt lonely. I meet people honestly, without pretense, without trying to get something from them. When we part cleanly, without the pain of clinging. I love freely because I am not trying to possess anyone. Over the next few days, Gaemon watched Rio interact with people in the village. He noticed something unexpected. The monk was not cold or detached. He engaged warmly with everyone he met. He listened carefully to a woman's worries. He played with children. He helped an elderly man repair a fence. He was fully present, fully engaged. But there was a quality to his presence that was different from how most people interacted. He did not seem to want anything from anyone. He was not trying to impress or gain anything. He gave his attention freely and completely to whatever was before him, and then moved on without trying to hold on to the encounter or make it into something permanent. On the day Rio was leaving the village, Gaemon came to walk with him for a while. "I have been thinking about what you said," Gaemon admitted. "About how we cannot keep anything. How everything must be left behind. This troubles me. It makes life seem meaningless. If we lose everything in the end, what is the point?" Rio smiled. "The point is living. Right now. Fully present for what is actually here. We make life meaningless when we spend it grasping at permanence that does not exist. When we use the present only as a means to secure some imagined future. When we are so busy accumulating and protecting that we forget to actually be alive." He gestured to the road ahead, the morning sunlight, the birds singing. "This moment is real. This walk is real. This conversation is real. Why would I miss this by worrying about what I cannot control? Why would I be half present here because my mind is busy protecting what I own or anxious about losing it?" Gaemon walked in silence for a while, thinking about his own life. How much time he spent managing his possessions. How much energy he gave to worrying about security. How little attention he gave to what was actually present in each moment. "I think I understand," he said finally. "You are free because you have nothing to protect. Nothing to lose. You can be completely here because you are not divided between here and your concerns about maintaining what you have." "Yes," Rio said. "But this freedom is not about having nothing. It is about holding everything lightly. You could have your house and possessions and still be free if you understood their temporary nature. The problem is not the things. The problem is believing they are permanent, believing they can give you ultimate security, grasping at them as if they could protect you from life's changes." They reached the edge of the village and stopped. Rio adjusted his robe and prepared to continue his journey. "I do not know if we will meet again," he said to Gaemon. "Probably not. But this meeting has been real. This conversation has been genuine. That is enough. I do not need it to last forever for it to have value." Gaemon felt a sadness at the parting, but also something else. A kind of clarity. "Thank you," he said. "You have shown me a different way of being." "I have shown you nothing you did not already know," Rio replied. "You know things are impermanent. Everyone knows this. I have just chosen to live as if it is true rather than pretending it is not." After Rio disappeared down the road, Gaemon walked back to his house. He looked at his possessions with different eyes. They were still useful, still beautiful in some cases, but he saw them now as temporary, as borrowed, as things that would outlast him or not, but either way were not truly his to keep forever. This recognition did not make him value them less. It made him hold them more lightly. And in that lighter holding, he felt something like the freedom he had sensed in the traveling monk. Rio shows us what it looks like to live with full understanding of impermanence. Not as a harsh ascetic denying himself everything, but as someone who has released the burden of trying to make permanent what cannot be permanent. His lightness comes from accepting reality rather than fighting it. This does not mean we should all become wandering monks with no possessions. Most of us have responsibilities, relationships, work that requires us to live in one place and own various things. But we can hold all of it more lightly. We can use what we need without grasping at it. We can love people without trying to possess them. We can engage fully with life without demanding it stay the same forever. When we live this way, many things change. We stop accumulating beyond what we actually need because we understand we cannot ultimately keep anything. We forgive more easily because we know holding resentment wastes the limited time we have. We express appreciation more often because we recognize people will not always be here. We take fewer things for granted because we see their temporary nature more clearly. Understanding impermanence makes us more present, not less. More engaged, not more detached. We can throw ourselves into life fully, precisely, because we know it will not last. The temporary nature of everything is not a reason to withdraw. It is a reason to show up completely. There is another way this teaching manifests in how people live. Not through lightness and traveling, but through presence and attention to what is here now. In a village surrounded by rice fields, there lived an elderly woman named Sora who tended a small garden behind her house. She was quite old, perhaps 80, and her body had become frail. She moved slowly and tired easily. She knew, without anyone saying it directly, that she did not have many years left. Perhaps not many seasons left. But Sora did not spend her time mourning what was passing or fearing what was coming. Instead, she poured her attention into her garden. Each spring when planting season came, she would work in the soil with complete attention, as if this might be the last time she planted seeds. She handled each seedling with care. She noticed the quality of the earth, the temperature of the air, the way sun moved across the garden through the day. When summer came and the plants grew, Sora would visit her garden multiple times each day. Not to work necessarily, but just to see, to notice, to appreciate. She would stand beside the tomato plants and observe how the fruit was ripening. She would watch insects, visiting the flowers. She would feel the leaves between her fingers, checking their health and texture. The village children noticed how much time Sora spent in her garden. One day, a young girl named Keiko asked her, "Why do you spend so much time looking at your garden? Don't you get bored seeing the same plants every day?" Sora smiled. "Come," she said. "Look with me." She led Keiko to a bean plant. "What do you see?" "A bean plant," Keiko said, "with beans growing on it." "Look more carefully," Sora suggested. "Tell me everything you notice." Keiko looked more closely. As she paid attention, she began to see more. The way the leaves curved. How some beans were ready to pick while others were still small and pale. How a bee was moving from flower to flower. How dew from the morning still clung to some leaves even though it was afternoon. "I see more than I thought," Keiko said, surprised. "Yes," Sora said. "And I see more than you because I have looked at this plant every day since it was a seed. I have watched it grow from nothing to this. I know which leaves were damaged by wind, which stems I had to support. I know this particular plant, not bean plants in general. This one." She touched a leaf gently. "And I look carefully because I know I will not be here forever. Maybe I will see this plant make beans this year. Maybe I will not be here next year to see new beans. This knowing makes me look carefully now, makes me appreciate what is actually here while I can see it." Over the following weeks, Keiko began visiting Sora's garden regularly. Sora would show her things to notice. The way a squash blossom opened in the morning. How rain brought worms to the surface. How the soil changed color when it needed water. She taught Keiko to really see what was before her, not just glance at it and move on. "Most people look at things but do not see them," Sora explained. "They are too busy thinking about other things. Planning, remembering, worrying. But the actual world is here, now, full of detail and beauty. When we know that we will not be here forever, that this moment will not repeat, we can finally be present for it." One afternoon, they were sitting together in the garden when Sora said, "I think this may be my last garden. My body is very tired. I feel the seasons turning in my bones. But I am not sad. I have had many gardens, many years of planting and growing and harvesting. I have been very fortunate." Keiko felt distressed. "Don't talk about dying. You will have more gardens." "Perhaps," Sora said. "Perhaps not. It does not matter. What matters is that I am here now. This garden is here now. I can see it and touch it and appreciate it. This is enough." She looked at Keiko with kind eyes. "When you are young, you think everything will last forever. You think there will always be time. Later, you realize time is precious. Everything is temporary. And this realization can make you either sad or awake. I choose to be awake." Keiko visited often after that. She learned not just about gardening, but about a way of being present. About noticing what is actually here instead of being lost in thoughts. About appreciating the temporary without mourning that it is temporary. When autumn came and Sora's garden began to fade, they harvested together what had grown. Sora moved slowly, tiring quickly, but she was fully present for the work. As they collected the last of the tomatoes, Sora said, "Everything that grows must also fade. The same force that makes seeds sprout makes leaves fall. This is not sad. This is complete. This is how life works." Sora did pass away that winter. Keiko grieved, but she also felt grateful. Sora had taught her something essential: how to be present for life while having life. How to see what is here before it is gone. How to appreciate the temporary without needing it to be permanent. The next spring, Keiko helped Sora's family plant a garden in the same space. As she worked the soil and placed seeds, she thought about Sora. How she had been fully alive until the end. How she had not wasted time wishing things were different. How she had met each moment, even her last season, with presence and appreciation. Keiko carried this teaching forward. As she grew older, she taught other children the same lessons. Look carefully. Be present. Notice what is actually here. Everything is temporary. This is not a problem. This is what makes everything precious. Both Rio and Sora lived with full understanding of impermanence, but in different ways. Rio's understanding led to lightness and freedom of movement. Sora's led to depth and intensity of presence. Both were completely engaged with life precisely because they knew it was temporary. This is what the teaching offers us. Not a reason to disengage or despair, but an invitation to wake up, to be present, to appreciate what is here while it is here, to love fully while knowing love will change or end, to give our attention to what matters instead of wasting it on what does not. When we understand impermanence deeply, we make different choices. We spend time with people we love instead of assuming they will always be available. We express gratitude more because we recognize that what we have could be gone tomorrow. We forgive more quickly because life is too short for sustained bitterness. We take chances we might otherwise postpone because we know there might not be a later. We also become more compassionate. When we see that everyone is temporary, that everyone is changing and aging and eventually dying, we recognize our shared condition. We are all in this together, all facing the same fundamental truth. This recognition softens our judgment and opens our hearts. Everyone is doing their best with the time they have, even when their best looks very imperfect. The teaching of impermanence, fully integrated, makes us both lighter and more present. Lighter because we release the impossible burden of trying to make things permanent. More present because we know each moment matters and will not repeat. We stop living for some imagined future where everything will finally be permanent and secure. We start living now with what is actually here, as it actually is. This does not mean we do not plan or prepare. It means we hold our plans lightly, ready to adjust when life inevitably brings unexpected changes. It means we prepare for the future without living only for the future. We remain anchored in the present while also tending responsibly to practical needs. The teaching transforms not just what we do, but who we are. We become people who can meet change without being destroyed by it. Who can love without grasping? Who can lose without losing ourselves? Who can be present for joy without demanding it last forever? Who can endure pain knowing it too will pass? We discover that impermanence is not the enemy. It is the teacher that shows us how to live, how to appreciate what we have, how to be present for our own lives, how to love fully while holding lightly, how to engage completely with the temporary moment we are actually living. This is the practical wisdom of impermanence. Not philosophical theory, but lived understanding. The kind of understanding that changes how we move through our days, how we meet the people we encounter, how we respond to what life brings. The kind of understanding that frees us to be fully alive while we have the chance. As we come to the end of our exploration tonight, take a moment to simply be where you are. Feel your body resting. Notice your breath moving gently in and out. Everything around you is changing, even in this quiet moment. And this is not a problem. This is simply how things are. Tonight we have journeyed through the teaching of impermanence from many angles. We saw how places transform and people evolve, how bodies age and thoughts arise and pass, how clinging to what is changing creates suffering, how the temporary nature of things can be a source of beauty rather than only loss, and how understanding impermanence deeply can help us live with more presence, more freedom, more appreciation for what is actually here. This teaching is one of the foundations of Zen and Buddhist practice. When we truly see that everything is impermanent, that nothing stays the same, that all things arise and pass away, we begin to hold life more lightly. We stop demanding that reality be different than it is. We flow with change rather than fighting against it. We appreciate what is here while it is here, knowing it will not last forever. You do not need to remember everything you heard tonight. The seeds have been planted. They will continue working in you in their own time. You may find yourself tomorrow noticing the impermanent nature of something you usually take for granted, or feeling less resistance to a change you are facing, or appreciating a moment more deeply because you recognize it is temporary. In our next episode, we will explore non-attachment, the practice of holding things lightly, of loving without grasping, of engaging fully with life while releasing our tight grip on how we think things should be. For now, let yourself rest completely. Let the day release its hold. Let your thoughts settle like leaves falling to the ground. Everything changes. Everything passes. And in this moment, you can simply be. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.